When the hero's party reached the fourth floor of the 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 Tower, absolute shock paralyzed the so-called champion. The precious princess he was supposed to rescue was actually one of the 4 heavenly demonic kings. Without a single second of hesitation, the princess unleashed ultimate tier spirit magic, preparing to obliterate him from existence. The hero's mind scrambled in pure confusion, knowing full well that mind-controlled puppets could never cast such divine magic. The horrifying truth finally smashed into his skull. The 𝒆𝒐𝒏 monsters, the devastating avalanches, the relentless night ambushes, and this very tower hidden deep within the treacherous valley. Even the mysteriously empty mana cannons on floors 1, 2, and 3. It was all a meticulously crafted death trap designed solely for him. Consumed by sheer, unadulterated madness, the desperate hero decided to burn the entire world to the ground. Right at that cinematic moment, our main character descended from the shadows like a true, terrifying villain, launching a lethal strike at the champion. Miraculously, the pathetic hero managed to block the devastating blow. Revealing his true, cowardly colors, the hero immediately hid behind an innocent elf, ruthlessly leeching the poor creature's life force just to replenish his own mana. Our main character could only let out a dark, mocking laugh at the sight of this supposed savior's absolute degradation. Calling out to his loyal subordinate, Gordon, the hero Hillen's wrist was severed in a blinding flash of steel. Before Hillen could even process his agonizing loss, 𝒔 conjured a massive sphere of pure demonic aura, ready to erase the champion from reality. But to understand this epic climax, we must rewind the hands of fate. Meet 𝒔, a legendary demon king, who lived strictly by the ancient standards set by the first demon lord. He now sat upon his dark throne, a hero's blade thrust straight through his dying heart. Following those outdated, rigid rules to the letter, 𝒔 had obediently constructed his dark tower and kidnapped the kingdom's princesses, playing the role of the perfect, predictable villain. He would capture the righteous champions who came to their rescue, arrogantly feeding off their blazing anger and crushing sorrow, while literally allowing them to grow stronger. Yet, despite ascending as the most powerful demon king in absolute history, he now sat choking in a pool of his own dark blood. His fading mind reeled, desperately wondering how a lowly, pathetic hero he had once mocked could butcher him so effortlessly. As the victorious humans spat insults at his dying body, the devastating truth finally shattered his worldview. These heroes he thought he was intimidating. They had been looking down on him this entire time. The sacred standards were nothing but a fatal lie. The so-called champion finally swung his blade to sever the Demon King's head. But with his very last ounce of blazing life force, 𝒔 detonated the entire throne room. He prayed to the abyss for just one more chance to rewrite those pathetic, self-destructive rules. 𝒔! A sudden voice pierced through the eternal darkness. His eyes snapped open, only to find himself standing in a grand, magnificent hall packed to the brim with military cadets dressed exactly like him. While his mind spun in absolute chaos, desperately trying to grasp reality, his name echoed across the massive room once more. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. He was being called to the grand stage to accept a prestigious award. Stepping up to the podium, a gleaming red badge was pinned to his chest. It was the absolute symbol of elite graduation from the legendary Demon King Military Academy. At that exact, heart-stopping moment, the pieces of Destiny's puzzle perfectly aligned. This was his graduation ceremony from 15 years ago. The heavens had granted him a miraculous reincarnation. Moments later, the entire graduating class was summoned to the stage. As the undisputed valedictorian, 𝒔 was granted the ultimate honor of reciting the Demon King standards. Standing before the roaring academy, the traumatic memories burned like hellfire in his mind. He remembered how their entire realm had been thoroughly humiliated just because they blindly followed those pathetic royal rules. In that split second, an overwhelming, unbreakable resolve ignited within his soul. He swore upon his life never to repeat his past failures, refusing to chain himself to a set of rules that guaranteed his brutal slaughter. Shocking the absolute core of the academy, 𝒔 fiercely declared he would never pledge loyalty to such unbelievable stupidity. Refusing to hold back even an inch, he ruthlessly trampled all over their sacred traditions, loudly branding the absolute standards as nothing but pure, unadulterated trash. The entire faculty and student body completely froze in horrifying silence. Their jaws hit the floor, utterly paralyzed by the fact that 𝒔, the Academy's most flawless and obedient prodigy, had just committed an unforgivable act of treason. Because of this unthinkable blasphemy, 𝒔 was violently dragged into a grand tribunal, facing the most terrifying, high-ranking demons of the realm. For a crime of this catastrophic magnitude, his head should have been severed right on the bloody courtroom floor. However, taking his legendary genius and flawless past record into account, they offered him one single, desperate chance at redemption. The towering Grand Duke demanded he swallow his words and beg for mercy before the entire realm, or face eternal banishment to the cursed dimension of Arren. Arren was a brutal, forsaken wasteland completely outside their domain. It was a literal graveyard where any demon king foolish enough to enter was slaughtered completely. To be sent there was an absolute, inescapable death sentence. Throughout the raging courtroom, furious high-ranking nobles vehemently protested, screaming that such a filthy traitor didn't even deserve a second chance. But while the Grand Duke sat on his high throne, expecting a weeping apology, 𝒊𝒈 stared him down with terrifying, unbreakable confidence. He boldly commanded the Duke to throw him into Arren, swearing he would conquer the graveyard from scratch and prove their beloved standards were absolute garbage. The entire courtroom completely erupted into blazing chaos. Blinded by supreme fury, the Grand Duke instantly hammered down his dark judgment. 𝒊𝒈 was officially sentenced to the abyss of Arren, completely stripped of his nobility and banished forever. As the ultimate, soul-crushing punishment, every single majestic privilege granted to a top-tier demon king was viciously ripped away. He was hurled into the savage unknown, entirely alone, without a single royal guard to protect his back. Plummeting through the skies of Arren, the very domain where the human race thrived, 𝒊𝒈 let out a dark, menacing chuckle. He wondered how entertaining it would be to live right in the backyard of the very insects who had murdered him in his past life. Looking back, he realized his past arrogance had been his absolute downfall. That foolish attempt at a grand conquest was the exact blade that ended his life. Unfurling his majestic demonic wings, 𝒊𝒈 easily sliced through the howling winds, landing flawlessly atop a jagged, frozen mountain. This time, the game would be played entirely by his rules. He swore an unbreakable oath to never let history repeat itself, fully determined to conquer this pathetic world properly, once and for all. Meanwhile, back in the fiery depths of the demon realm, ancient traditions dictated that the top graduate of the Servant Academy must pledge eternal loyalty to the #1 Demon King cadet. Gordon Direct, the undisputed prodigy of the Servant Academy, had always considered this absolute fate to be his life's greatest, shining honor. Just moments before graduation, he and his elite peers had excitedly whispered about his overwhelming luck. To serve a legendary powerhouse like 𝒊𝒈 was a literal dream come true. After all, 𝒊𝒈 possessed the mythical bloodline of a demonic dragon, making him a breathtaking, once-in-a-millennium phenomenon. He was a destined emperor, whose name would surely be carved into the eternal history books. So, watching their flawless idol publicly defile the sacred standards had completely and utterly shattered their fanatical dreams. Yet, despite the soul-crushing disappointment, Gordon's absolute loyalty remained unshaken. He boldly tracked 𝒊𝒈 down, even in the cursed freezing lands of Arren. 𝒊𝒈's eyes widened in genuine shock, fully believing he had been abandoned to face this nightmare entirely alone. Before our anti-hero could even properly welcome him, Gordon completely lost his damn mind. The servant exploded in a blazing fit of rage, furiously demanding to know why his idol had willingly humiliated their glorious kingdom. 𝒊𝒈 just stood there, completely baffled. In his past life, Gordon had been as cold and calm as a frozen lake. Seeing his previously emotionless servant completely lose his temper was a truly bizarre, system-breaking experience. For a split second, the Demon King heavily considered revealing the truth about his miraculous regression, but realizing that spouting nonsense about traveling through time would make him sound utterly insane, he wisely decided to swallow the secret whole. Taking a deep, ragged breath, Gordon finally reined in his exploding emotions. He bowed deeply, apologizing for his massive disrespect, and swore an unbreakable blood oath to serve 𝒊𝒈 to the bitter end. Now, according to the ancient standards, a Demon King's very first task was to construct their towering fortress of doom. However, the sacred rules strictly warned against building in environments that were too treacherous. A proper dungeon had to be accessible enough for the pathetic human heroes to easily find. Since they were currently standing in the middle of an apocalyptic blizzard, Gordon urgently advised his master to relocate. Between the raging storms and the terrifying native monsters, a human wouldn't dare step foot in this frozen hellscape. But 𝒊𝒈's lips curled into a wicked, knowing smirk. Throwing the idiotic rulebook completely out the window, he confidently declared that this absolute nightmare of a location was the perfect, inescapable spot for his dark domain. Without another word, he plunged a mystical tower seed deep into the frozen earth and sliced his own palm, feeding it with his royal, demonic blood. Watching in absolute disbelief, Gordon could only ask how his master could so easily toss away a demon king's sacred pride, but 𝒏𝒈 simply scoffed. To him, the demon realm's standards were absolute trash, especially in a wretched place like Aaron. Suddenly, the abyss seed awakened. It began scanning its master's terrifying reservoir of mana. Recognizing 𝒏𝒈 as a supremely rare, cataclysmic demon, the seed violently erupted. It shot toward the heavens, forging a colossal tower of darkness in the blink of an eye. Watching the menacing structure rise, 𝒏𝒈 finally deduced the truth. The reason demons kept getting slaughtered in Aaron? Humans had decoded their tower building system after destroying so many of them. The pathetic mortals were weaponizing the demon standards against them. Once the abyssal fortress was fully constructed, the anti-hero and his minions stepped inside, heading straight for the throne room. Walking through the desolate halls, Gordon looked around in sheer confusion. Shouldn't a demon lord's domain be crawling with bloodthirsty monsters? Then the grim reality hit him. 𝒏𝒈 had been stripped of his privileges. There would be zero reinforcements from the underworld. They reached the ominous throne room on the 5th floor. But just as the overpowered protagonist stepped toward his rightful seat, Gordon frantically blocked his path. The minion reminded him of the system's second absolute rule. A true demon king must kidnap royal blood, preferably a prime heir to the throne. The higher their status, the richer the dark energy they could harvest. Pointing to the closest human territory, Gordon urged his master to snatch their most prized princess. Inhaling the kingdom's concentrated despair and wrath would trigger a massive power-up. To the minion's utter shock, the rebellious anti-hero actually agreed to play along. However, a wicked smirk crossed his face. He already had a specific target in mind. Gordon begged to join the raiding party, but 𝒏𝒈 mercilessly ordered him to stay behind. Someone had to guard this empty shell of a fortress. Bursting through the skies, he flew toward the most distant kingdom on the map. His prey? The entirely forgotten 13th princess of Hinduran. Crashing into her chambers, the demon king boldly declared his malicious intent, but her reaction defied all logic. Without a flinch, she gazed into his eyes and asked, "Are you sure you can handle me?" Annoyed by her lack of fear, 𝒏𝒈 flared his monstrous aura. He was a demon lord, of course he could crush her. Instead of screaming for the royal guard, the girl simply surrendered. "Just take me away," she whispered. Now, it was the overpowered villain's turn to be completely bewildered. Narrowing his glowing eyes, he demanded to know her scheme. She sighed, claiming she had anticipated this tragic fate since birth. 𝒏𝒈 warned her that his guard would remain raised, but the princess merely chuckled. "Relax," she teased. "There was no way I could have predicted your exact arrival today." Deciding to call her bluff, the anti-hero scooped her up and vanished into the night. Arriving back at the Dark Tower, he casually tossed his royal hostage over to Gordon. The minion was fuming over this seemingly useless catch. 𝒏𝒈 ordered him to escort the girl to the 4th floor. Gordon's jaw dropped. Why not throw her in the abyssal dungeon? With a lazy shrug, 𝒏𝒈 explained that since she had been completely docile, he felt like showing a tiny ounce of mercy. The 4th floor was an absolute wasteland. A chilling, desolate void devoid of any life. As the heavy doors slammed shut behind her, the harsh reality of her kidnapping finally sank in. Her days of lounging in luxurious silk were officially gone forever. Yet mysteriously, a gentle smile graced her lips. She actually found the freezing darkness incredibly soothing. By the time the sun rose the next day, 𝒏𝒈 received a sinister invitation from the Beast Tower, a stronghold that had terrorized Aaron long before his arrival. Gordon naively assumed it was a welcoming banquet for the new king, but 𝒏𝒈's eyes gleamed with killing intent. Welcome party? No. This was a pathetic attempt to establish dominance and humiliate him. In the demon realm, kings possessed mountains of lethal pride. Bowing to another ruler was a fate worse than death. But Aaron was a completely different battlefield. Here, supreme entities were forced to swallow their arrogance and form alliances. In his past life, 𝒏𝒈 had completely ignored these weaklings. But now that he was trapped in their territory, he figured a little diplomatic chat wouldn't hurt. Entering the Beast Tower, they were immediately confronted by a towering lycanthrope. 𝒆𝒏𝒈, the terrifying beast demon king. Flexing his explosive muscles, 𝒆𝒏𝒈 bragged about ruling this savage land for 70 years. He sneered at 𝒏𝒈, trying to suffocate the newcomer with his oppressive aura. The wolf mocked 𝒏𝒈 for daring to insult the sacred system. But the anti-hero didn't even blink. Instead, he coldly snapped back, Did you invite me here just to play the clown? Radiating pure arrogance, 𝒂𝒂💈 ordered the mutt to get straight to the damn point. Grinding his fangs, 𝒔𝒂💐 revealed that the Grand Duke had ordered him to monitor the exile's every move. Hearing that cursed title, 𝒂💂💈 intentionally spat on the noble's name. He called the Grand Duke a noisy, senile old vampire. �💂💐's blood boiled instantly. How dare this trash insult the Supreme Commander? Roaring in fury, the wolf slammed his half-eaten slab of meat into the dirt. He commanded 𝒂💂💈 to lick it clean. Pay for your insolence, or die. But 𝒂💂💈 just tilted his head. Do you seriously not know why I was banished to Arène? �💂💐 growled back. Because you dared to mock the Demon King's absolute laws. In a flash of terrifying speed, 𝒂💂💈 stomped the meat into dust. The very earth shattered beneath his foot. He calmly reminded the beast that the laws also forbade kings from killing each other. Then, locking eyes with the wolf, he whispered, "Do I look like the type of guy who follows the rules?" A paralyzing shiver violently cascaded down �💂💐's spine. His primal instincts screamed in absolute terror. He had never faced a demon with such a monstrous, suffocating presence. Cold sweat drenched the wolf's fur. Panicking, he desperately changed the subject. The Grand Duke merely wanted to verify if the kidnapping quota was fulfilled. He stuttered that failing to report within 30 days meant losing all authority, but �💂💈 brutally cut him off. The deed was already done. He had secured a royal plaything perfectly tailored to his tastes. Leaving the paralyzed beast behind, the overpowered main character strutted out with Godon. He muttered that tossing the wolf a bone was just a temporary fix. The real war was brewing, and Godon needed to brace for absolute carnage. Wasting no time, he dispatched his minion to check on the hostage. It was time to squeeze every ounce of value out of that royal bloodline. Alone in the shadows, 𝒂💂💈 calculated the sheer chaos about to engulf Arène. Every single demon king in the sector probably had a massive target painted on his back. The lethal consequences of mocking the system were spiraling completely out of control. Yet, a ruthless grin stretched across his face. If given the chance, he would do it all over again. He would rather have his soul obliterated than ever bow to that pathetic trash. Pushing the thought aside, he summoned his system panel to check his kidnapping rewards. Since he bagged the lowest-ranking royal in existence, he expected a measly few hundred mana points. But as the golden digits materialized, his jaw hit the floor. 13,000 points. The jackpot had practically broken the system. While his brain short-circuited trying to comprehend the glitch, a holographic projection flared to life. It was a message from �💂💐, practically groveling in awe. The beast praised 𝒂💂💈's legendary feat, claiming no ordinary demon could have pulled off such an impossible raid. Before 𝒂💂💈 could piece the puzzle together, Godon burst into the room, screaming about a massive anomaly on the 4th floor. The anti-hero teleported to the scene and froze in absolute disbelief. The desolate, frozen wasteland had mutated. It was now a breathtaking, vibrant sanctuary pulsing with overwhelming life force. His mind raced violently. In the entire continent, only one legendary spirit summoner possessed such divine mastery, and it definitely was not the forgotten 13th princess. The horrifying truth struck him like a thunderbolt. He had snatched the wrong girl. Demanding answers, he glared at the royal captive. But she merely offered a blindingly radiant smile. "Allow me to formally introduce myself," she chimed. "I am the first princess of the Hinduran kingdom." Meanwhile, miles away in the human capital, catastrophe had struck. The king collapsed in sheer devastation as the horrific report arrived. His absolute most precious treasure, the firstborn heir, had been stolen by the darkness. The king's fury shook the very heavens. He ordered the realm's strongest heroes to slaughter the Demon King and reclaim his precious daughter. Meanwhile, our anti-hero smirked at the princess. He mocked her, asking if she still thought she was too much to handle. He had sensed it. She was a genius elemental mage, overflowing with boundless mana. So, he demanded to know how she managed to hide such overwhelming power from his eyes. Raising a delicate ring, she revealed her secret. It was a family heirloom, an ancient artifact meant to conceal her aura. Having been thoroughly outplayed, she challenged him, asking if he would finally send her home. But our Demon King began calculating his next move. Stepping down now was not an option. Returning her would shatter his pride, branding him a coward. Worse, it would completely cripple his ability to harvest demonic energy. He had crossed the point of no return. Suddenly, a system alert flashed before his eyes. He had become the ultimate target, and the pure hatred of a kingdom was locking onto his location. But to an absolute overlord, this was basically free experience points. His demonic energy skyrocketed. Staring down at the princess, he made his absolute decree. Her noble bloodline meant nothing here. She was, and forever would be, his captive. Back in Hindaran, the royal throne room echoed with thunderous roars. The king demanded the immediate execution of this monster. His vassals scrambled to calm him down. The enemy's true identity remained shrouded in mystery, and they begged their lord to wait for the scout's report. But the blazing wrath of a father could not be quenched. He cursed them as utterly useless trash, demanding answers immediately. Stepping through the heavy tension, the royal advisor finally spoke up, sensing a darker truth behind this incident. He reminded the court of recent history. The previous demon king of lust had provoked absolute chaos by kidnapping a foreign prince. That foolish mistake ended with heroes turning him into dust. Yet now, right on the heels of that slaughter, an unknown entity dared to snatch Princess Ernan. A chilling realization washed over the royal court. The king gritted his teeth. A new demon king had just ascended to the throne. Moments later, a scout burst into the grand hall. They had tracked the teleportation magic. The magical signature carved a path straight north, dead-ending at the cursed 𝒊𝒏𝒈 mountain range. The king collapsed into his throne, struck by the horrifying distance between them. Meanwhile, inside the shadowy walls of his dark tower, Gordon delivered the grim news. The Hindaran army would march soon. He trembled, terrified that their defenses would crumble. But the demon king simply let out a dark, mocking laugh. He told his trembling servant to relax, because the royal vanguard would never even catch a glimpse of this tower. His grand design was flawless. This demonic fortress sat at the absolute northern edge of the continent. To reach them, the Hindaran forces would have to march through neighboring realms, and no human kingdom would ever allow a foreign army to casually cross their borders. Cornered by politics, the royal family had only one desperate option left. They had to empty their treasury and hire the Hero Association. Exactly as our mastermind predicted, the king sent an emergency plea to the so-called champions of justice. Soon after, the guild halls buzzed with the scandalous news of the royal kidnapping. But the moment those heroes saw the destination, their righteous fire died instantly. 𝒊𝒏𝒈 was an absolute death trap, an infamous hellscape swarming with abyssal monsters. The reality was sickening. Most of these shining champions could not care less about a grieving father's tears, as long as their own lives were not at risk. Back in the Dark Tower, our anti-hero laid out his master stroke. He knew the bitter truth about human nature. Those hypocritical heroes would not lift a single finger. They worshipped gold, and despised throwing their lives away in actual danger. That vile human greed was the exact reason he built his stronghold in 𝒊𝒏𝒈. Gordon stared in absolute awe at this strategic genius, wondering if his master had secretly lived in the human realm of Erin to understand their rotten core so perfectly. Time ticked on. The king's fury reached a boiling point, as every single hero rejected the perilous quest. Our demon king capitalized on this delay, knowing it would take time for the humans to assemble an elite strike force brave enough to hunt him. Swiping open his glowing status window, reality hit him hard. His current demonic energy reserves were far too weak to annihilate a high-tier hero party. A phantom pain gripped his chest as memories of his past deaths at the hands of heroes flashed through his mind. He needed a different angle. He ordered Gordon to contact Drawn immediately. He was going to sell his demonic energy for cold, hard human cash. His assistant froze, completely short-circuiting at the absurd command. When the reality of the order finally sank in, Gordon screamed in absolute horror. Was his master completely out of his mind? Demonic energy was the ultimate currency of the abyss, the very essence that allowed a demon to shatter their limits. In the demon realm, more energy meant overwhelming, godlike authority. The idea of trading that absolute power for worthless human coins was nothing short of absolute madness. But our anti-hero's gaze remained icy and absolute. He bluntly stated that his current mana could never stop a hero's blade. However, weaponizing the endless greed of humanity, now that was a gamble worth taking. After striking a dark bargain with Drawn and converting his precious points into pure wealth, he descended upon a fortress city near the 𝒊𝒏𝒈 mountains. As he casually strode toward the towering gates, the guards crossed their spears to block his path. Without breaking his stride, he claimed the title of a wandering mercenary and casually tossed a gleaming gold coin into the air. The guards instantly caught the bait, waving him through while immediately fighting over the glittering bribe. Stepping into the unfamiliar, bustling streets, he realized he needed a local pawn to guide his steps. He headed straight into the gritty mercenary guild. Inside, the guildmaster was chugging cheap ale, loudly mocking the rumors of a new demon king as complete garbage. The other roughnecks tried to convince him. They spoke of Princess Ernan being snatched by the Dark Sovereign, but the drunkard brushed it off. The distance between Ujis and Hindaran was massive. The logistics alone made it an impossible fairy tale. The tavern erupted in cynical laughter. They all agreed this was just a pathetic political scam to squeeze more taxes from the commoners. The guildmaster chuckled, mocking how the so-called heroes would do literally anything for an extra coin. Suddenly, a chilling shadow loomed behind him. Our demon king had heard enough. Finding their local knowledge quite useful, he decided to make his move. Releasing a terrifying aura, he commanded the guildmaster to stay and ordered the rest of the trash to get lost. Blinded by foolish pride, the mercenaries drew their weapons and charged, but they were practically insects. In a flash of overwhelming martial prowess, he crushed them all effortlessly, leaving their broken bodies littering the floor. One massive brute swung a heavy warhammer straight at his skull. Our overpowered protagonist did not even flinch. He caught the devastating blow with his bare hand and sent the giant flying across the room. As the archers scrambled in a panic, the once arrogant guildmaster ground his teeth in pure terror, finally realizing the absolute monster standing before him. Outside the tavern, the townsfolk simply ignored the crashing and screaming. In a filthy mercenary town like this, a brutal tavern brawl was just another Tuesday. Seconds later, dead silence fell over the blood-stained room. Looming over the only conscious survivor, the Demon King offered a dark bargain. Answer his questions, and he gets to keep his pathetic life. Trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, the mercenary begged for mercy. The anti-hero coldly demanded the location of the underground slave market. The broken man immediately led the way. Scanning the miserable human merchandise, our protagonist asked if there was any exotic blood available. To sweeten the deal, he tossed a heavy, jingling pouch of gold into the mercenary's trembling hands. The greedy fool's terror instantly vanished, replaced by a sickening, ear-to-ear grin as he eagerly guided his new master. Watching this pathetic display, our Dark Sovereign realized a universal truth. Humans and demons were exactly the same. Both species would happily burn the world down to feed their darkest desires. As they stepped into a hidden VIP room, a memory surfaced. He recalled telling Gordon his grand master plan. He needed an elf slave. Their pure, naive nature made them the absolute perfect spies to infiltrate and shatter the hero's party from the inside. Meanwhile, destiny was setting its pieces into motion. The legendary hero Hen and his elite strike force knelt before the king. Swearing an oath to absolute justice, they vowed to rescue the princess and mount the new Demon King's head on a spike. Back in the shadowy depths of the black market, our protagonist finalized his scheme. Elves were notoriously gullible, making them incredibly easy to manipulate. The slimy slave trader slithered out of the shadows, asking the Dark Lord to make his choice. Pointing at a chained elf, he claimed his prize. Then, with a wicked smirk, he declared that the mercenary guildmaster would be covering the bill. The mercenary almost choked on his own spit, but one terrifying glare from the Demon King forced him to swallow his objections. The spineless guide reluctantly handed over the gold. With the transaction complete, our protagonist demanded the room be cleared. The trader nervously warned him that elves were incredibly wild and dangerous, but the Demon King simply chuckled, ensuring that his generous guildmaster would happily pay for any property damage. Now completely alone in the dim dungeon, he approached the iron cage. With a mere flicker of his dark mana, the heavy magical chains binding the elf instantly shattered into dust. The elf gasped, his sharp senses immediately detecting the suffocating aura of the abyss. He realized this was no human, but a creature of pure demonic origin. Narrowing his eyes, the elf demanded to know what a demon wanted with him. Staring down at his new pawn, our anti-hero smiled dangerously. "I am here," he whispered, "to give you the absolute power to destroy humanity." The captive elf sneered at the tempting offer. "Trust a demon?" he spat. "I'd sooner trust the greedy humans who chained me." But Beggar simply smirked. "I am not like the others," he declared. He offered a blood oath. Serve him for 50 years, and absolute freedom would follow. 50 years is but a fleeting breath to an immortal like you, he manipulated smoothly. The elf's eyes narrowed with hostility. "Your kind exists only to burn down the world tree," he growled. "Why would I ever bow to an enemy of nature itself?" Yet, curiosity gnawed at the elf's mind. Why was a high-ranking demon begging for his power? Sensing his hesitation, Beggar raised his hand. He swore upon the absolute pride of the Demon King that the sacred branches of the world tree would remain untouched. The weight of those words hit the elf like a physical blow. A vow on the Demon King's honor was absolute law. He was dead serious. With a casual flick of his wrist, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 shattered the heavy iron chains. "Now, swear your loyalty upon your precious world tree for 50 years, the demon demanded. The elf rubbed his bruised wrists, completely baffled by this eccentric monster. "I am Granada of the Maple tribe," he declared proudly, "and I will only bend the knee to the true demon king who sent you." 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂's lips curled into a lazy smile. "You're looking at him." Granada burst into a fit of hysterical laughter. "What a sick joke," the elf wheezed. "The supreme ruler of demons leaving his absolute domain, just to recruit a lowly slave in person? Impossible!" Wiping a tear of mirth from his eye, Granada made a fatal wager. "If you are truly the supreme sovereign, I will serve you for 100 years instead of 50. "Deal," 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 smirked. Moments later, they arrived at the tower's 5th floor. As 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 casually claimed the dark throne, he whispered, 100 years. Remember your vow." But Granada exploded in rage. The grand demonic stronghold was completely empty. "You scam artist," he roared. "Look at this pathetic ruin," the elf spat. "At this rate, you won't even survive a single year. The hero's party will march in and butcher you like a pig." Refusing to serve a fraud, Granada turned his back. But then, the air grew heavy. A terrifying, suffocating aura erupted from 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂's body. "The contract," the Dark Lord whispered, sending shivers down the elf's spine. Granada dropped to his knees, instantly changing his tune. That overwhelming, monstrous pressure was undeniable. The pure, unfiltered malice of a true sovereign. 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 was the real deal. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked in Granada's mind. The ferocious, giant beasts lurking in the mountains had cowered as they passed by. Only one existence could command such absolute fear from the wild. Defeated by pure dominance, Granada bowed his head to the floor. He bound his soul to the supreme being for 100 years. Bracing himself for an epic assassination mission, he awaited his master's command. "Go cook me dinner," the absolute ruler ordered. The elf's jaw dropped to the core of the earth. Chopping vegetables in the gloomy kitchen, Granada questioned his life choices. Did this terrifying entity really leave his throne room, just to kidnap a personal chef? Suddenly, a mysterious girl surrounded by floating spirits skipped into the room. "Need a hand?" she chirped cheerfully. Together, they whipped up a feast and served it in the grand dining hall. But as they sat down, a horrifying truth was revealed. His bubbly kitchen helper was none other than the first princess of Hindaran. Granada almost choked on his breath. "Are you out of your mind?" he shrieked at the Dark Lord. "Kidnapping royalty is a death sentence. We have literally 0 defenses against the hero's party," the elf panicked. Even Godin nodded grimly at the brutal reality. But 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 just chuckled, his eyes glowing with dangerous intent. "Why do you think I bought you, my pointy-eared friend?" "Relax and eat," the villainous overlord commanded, taking a bite. "Delicious," he praised. The kidnapped princess proudly puffed out her chest, bragging about her culinary skills. Granada stared at them in utter disbelief. His entire understanding of good, evil, and logic was shattering into a million pieces. After the bizarre meal, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 dragged his new subordinate up to the 4th floor. The tension returned as Granada prepared for war. "So, am I your frontline meat shield against the invading heroes?" he asked darkly. "Hell no," 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 snorted. "If those overpowered freaks reach my doorstep, we're all dead meat." A wicked smirk crossed the Dark Sovereign's face. "Your mission is far more sinister. You are going to plunge the human world into absolute chaos." The declaration sent a thrill through the room. "But before I unleash you upon humanity," the master declared, cracking his knuckles, "I need to see exactly what you are capable of." Granada scoffed, questioning the monster's sanity. "Fight the absolute ruler in his own domain? That's just suicide." To make things interesting, the overpowered boss offered a massive handicap. 1 hand. 0 magic energy. "Come at me," 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 provoked. And then, he dropped the ultimate bait. "Land a solid hit, and I'll slice 50 years off your soul contract." The elf's fighting spirit ignited like a raging inferno. "You'll regret looking down on me," Granada roared, drawing his battle stance. Boom! The warrior launched a relentless barrage of razor-sharp strikes. He pushed the demonic ruler back with explosive speed. Yet, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 flawlessly parried and dodged every lethal blow with a single hand. "Not bad for a guy who's been chained up in a dungeon," the anti-hero mocked smoothly. The Sovereign's piercing gaze analyzed the combat data in real time. "You're draining the ambient mana to supercharge your physical specs, aren't you?" A classic, elegant technique suited for the children of the forest. But Granada's aura suddenly shifted violently. A normal elf couldn't even dream of surviving my next art, he warned, his eyes flashing with lethal intent. His hands flew through ancient seals at blinding speed. Rocky armor materialized, wrapping his arm in unbreakable stone. Summoning demonic vines from the earth, he locked Beggar's feet in place. "You're wide open," the warrior bellowed, launching a devastating, earth-shattering punch. But fate is a cruel mistress. The invincible master's lips curled into a terrifying smile. "Did you forget who you're dealing with?" he whispered. "I promise no magic, but I'll try not to shatter your skull with pure physical force." Bam! The devastating counterattack sent the elf crashing through the floor. Despite the massive handicap, Granada was ruthlessly humbled. Later, the victorious overlord strolled into the Red Hawk mercenary camp. Their cowardly captain immediately dropped to his knees, licking the boots of the monster who broke them. The heavily injured grunts watched in pure disgust. Their so-called leader was wagging his tail for the very nightmare who had nearly slaughtered them all. Honor was truly dead. Clink! A heavy pouch bursting with shiny gold coins hit the dirt. "Consider this your signing bonus," the dark boss announced. Instantly, the grim mood evaporated. The bruised soldiers did a hilarious 180-degree turn, singing praises to their new sugar daddy. Watching his men simp for cash, the captain seriously debated finding a new crew. "I'm assigning a new recruit to your squad," Beggar casually dropped the bomb. Blinded by greed, the captain agreed without a second thought, but his men desperately tried to grab his legs to stop him from accepting unknown baggage. Then, the battered and bruised Granada stumbled out of the shadows. He looked even more pathetic and traumatized than the mercenaries. Tears of genuine pity welled up in the soldiers' eyes. Without a word, they embraced the broken elf as one of their own. The mastermind watched the pathetic scene unfold from above. They were greedy clowns, but their combat stats were surprisingly high. The clock was ticking. Hill, the legendary hero who had decimated the Lord of Lust, was preparing his crusade. The first order of business? The Red Hawks were sent to gather intel on this overpowered threat. Returning to his desolate throne room, reality set in for the anti-hero. If he wanted to survive the incoming storm, it was time for a serious level up. Normally, a sovereign would spend dark points to upgrade the system or boost their own stats. But this broke boss had sold every last point for cash. His only shot at a massive power awakening lay hidden in the wild. The legendary Soul Flower. It was a miraculous artifact, pure crystallized mana born from the earth itself. Consuming it would trigger an exponential surge in combat power. However, humanity's greed had corrupted most of the world's natural ley lines. But the treacherous 𝒂𝒒 mountains remained untouched by human hands. Swarming with catastrophic beasts, the primal land was practically dripping with raw, ancient mana. A soul flower blooming there would be a divine-tier treasure. Its energy purity would be absolutely off the charts. As the ambitious lord prepared for the expedition, Godon blocked his path. "It's madness," the loyal aide warned. "The terrain is a death trap, and bloodthirsty mutants will swarm you the second you blink." "Fodder monsters are no threat to me," the arrogant sovereign brushed him off. But he frowned at a glaring technical issue. The real headache is tracking the artifact without a proper mana radar. "Knock, knock! Speak of the devil!" The energetic princess peeked her head through the door. "Are you guys busy?" she chirped innocently. Ding! A wicked light bulb went off in the master manipulator's head. He instantly drafted the royal hostage as his personal loot radar. Stepping into the sunlight, the girl stretched her arms with pure joy. "Finally! I was dying of boredom in that gloomy dungeon," she cheered. Turning to her kidnapper, she struck a sassy bargain. "If I find your precious little flower, you have to let me redecorate the 4th floor my way." The clueless Dark Lord nodded in agreement, secretly scratching his head. Hadn't she already turned that floor into a sparkly mess? Meanwhile, the mischievous princess pumped her fist in victory. Thank the heavens she had the guts to knock on the boss's door. Beggar's arm wrapped securely around her waist. In a flash, they shot straight into the boundless sky. At first, Ernan screamed in pure, unadulterated terror. But as the wind calmed, she slowly opened her eyes, and the sheer, breathtaking scale of the world left her speechless. Absolute awe washed over her trembling form. She had never witnessed such overwhelming majesty. Having been locked inside the royal palace, her entire life, forced to study and endure endless training, she genuinely believed that suffocating cage would be her tomb. But look at her now. She was gazing down at towering mountain peaks from the clouds. Overflowing with innocent joy, she eagerly asked Beggar if she was the first human in history to soar above the U.S. mountains. The Demon King couldn't care less about her milestones. He coldly addressed her as princess. When she pleaded with him to use her real name, 𝒊𝒈 paused for a fraction of a second. He roughly hoisted her up by the arm, his eyes flashing with a dark warning. He reminded her she was merely a hostage. She better not dare to cross the line. The terrifying threat of his dark dungeon was highly effective. 𝒆𝒐𝒏 immediately swallowed her pride and obeyed. Like a perfect, submissive captive, she summoned her elemental spirits and commanded them to track down the legendary Soul Flower. 𝒊𝒈 calculated this would take quite a while. The U.S. mountain range was massively vast and treacherous, after all. Still, a slight smirk crossed his face. At least these floating little spirits were leagues faster than him and Gordon. To his absolute shock, the elemental spirits zipped back in record time. 𝒆𝒏 proudly announced that her familiars had pinpointed the target. But upon arriving at the coordinates, they found the glowing Soul Flower surrounded by a vicious pack of Auripol monsters. 𝒊𝒈 decided to play nice, just this once. He commanded the lowly beasts to bow down and hand over the treasure. But the foolish monsters actually bared their fangs. They bluntly refused, even knowing they stood before the Supreme Demon King. Realizing diplomacy was completely wasted on these oversized, mutated monkeys, 𝒊𝒈 prepared for a one-sided massacre. Black abyssal flames violently erupted from his fingertips. In a single, devastating breath, the defiant monsters were reduced to nothing but scattered ashes. 𝒆𝒏 stood completely paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror and sheer amazement at his overwhelming, godlike power. By nightfall, 𝒊𝒈 had effortlessly wiped out the entire Auripol horde. With the path finally cleared, 𝒆𝒏 stared hungrily at the glowing, mystical petals of the Soul Flower. Sensing its incredibly pure and potent mana, 𝒊𝒈 harshly scolded the princess to wipe that greedy look off her face. The Overlord ruthlessly yanked the legendary plant right out of the earth. He coldly mocked her, saying she could have one, if she somehow miraculously found another. Too bad for her, the area was entirely picked clean. Without a second thought, 𝒊𝒈 dragged his hostage all the way back to the Dark Tower. Back inside his sinister stronghold, 𝒊𝒈 carefully examined the radiating Soul Flower. He silently noted to himself, this mortal hostage actually possessed way more utility than he had initially calculated. Suddenly, the heavy doors burst open. His loyal subordinate, Gordon, rushed in with urgent intel from their spy, Granada. Gordon's face was pale with absolute dread. He reported that the hero, Hand, had formed an alliance with 32 other awakened champions, and they had already marched out of the Hinduran capital. But here was the plot twist. The heroes weren't making a beeline for the U.S. mountains. Instead, they were grinding side quests, forming hunting parties, and helping pathetic villagers, slowly farming experience points to grow stronger before the final boss battle. Gordon frantically unrolled their defensive blueprints on the table. He showed 𝒊𝒈 the standard monster deployments meant to stall the hero's journey, but 𒊉𝒈 just let out a dark scoff. He shattered Gordon's reality by completely trashing the entire battle plan. The Demon King glared down at his trembling advisor. He declared they would absolutely not send out low-level cannon fodder. Throwing half-hearted obstacles at the heroes would only feed them precious experience points and turn them into unstoppable monsters. Instead, the anti-hero issued a terrifyingly brilliant command. Tell Granada to dispatch his underground mercenaries. They would silently shadow the hero's party and actively help them complete their pathetic quests to build absolute trust. Gordon was practically pulling his hair out in pure frustration. He whined that this completely violated the traditional Demon King standards. He anxiously warned 𝒊𝒈 that their current tower defenses couldn't possibly stop a fully leveled hero party. But 𝒊𝒈 just flashed a wicked, supremely confident grin. The Overlord calmly announced he would reinforce their demonic tower. Using a dwarf! Gordon's sanity finally snapped in half. He genuinely thought his master had lost his mind, choosing to recruit a random demi-human instead of raising a proper monster army. Gordon screamed at the very top of his lungs. He cried that the entire Dark Realm would die laughing at them. A stout little dwarf working inside the terrifying Demon Lord's tower? It was an absolute, unforgivable disgrace. 𝒊𝒈's crimson eyes flashed with lethal intent. He unleashed a heavy wave of dark magic that instantly forced Gordon's jaw shut. With the throne room finally dead silent, 𝒊𝒈 coldly clarified his master plan. He needed a legendary dwarven blacksmith to forge advanced magical artifacts. He leaned in, reminding his panicked subordinate of a fatal flaw in the hero system. Heroes always expect to be warmly welcomed on the first floor by weak, squishy slimes. But 𝒊𝒈? He was about to brutally rewrite the rules of survival. A sinister, echoing laugh filled the throne room. He told Gordon to imagine the sheer horror on the heroes' faces when they open the front door and get instantly blasted by dozens of magical artillery cannons. Gordon blinked, slowly processing the brutal genius of it, before muttering that this was still way too unconventional. But when Gordon nervously looked back up at the throne, the Demon King had already vanished into thin air. Absolute panic gripped the poor advisor. He just knew his crazy, unpredictable boss was off to violently kidnap someone else. Meanwhile, deep beneath the Earth's surface, inside the sprawling, subterranean dwarven city of 𝒊𝒏𝒈, 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂 had locked onto his next high-value target, the absolute pinnacle of all dwarven blacksmiths, the legendary logger Friedrich. Stepping into the fiery underground metropolis, 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂's sharp eyes scanned the glowing forge district. He smirked to himself, realizing this was actually his very first time infiltrating 𝒊𝒏𝒈. Despite having slaughtered countless dwarfs in his past life, he flawlessly masked his oppressive demonic aura to look like an ordinary human traveler. Striding into a dingy tavern, he slammed heavy gold coins onto the counter and demanded the absolute best weapon forger in the city. The greedy dwarf's eyes practically turned into shiny gold coins. He snatched the money in a heartbeat, loudly praising 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂 for fully understanding the unquenchable avarice of their species. The informant eagerly pointed him toward the deepest, darkest pit of the city center. Down there, he would find Logger, the unrivaled master of the anvil. 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂 followed the tip into the sweltering heat and soon spotted his prey. Logger was completely absorbed in crafting a terrifyingly beautiful, glowing weapon. 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂's demonic eyes widened in genuine, rare respect. It wasn't just raw hammer strength. Logger was flawlessly weaving raw mana into the very fabric of the steel. After silently studying the masterpiece for a moment, 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂 slipped into the shadows, preparing to snatch the blacksmith. But against all mortal odds, searing flames violently blasted out from the half-finished weapon. 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂 instinctively leaped backward, his combat senses screaming. How on earth did this mere dwarf detect his heavily suppressed demonic aura? In a split second, Logger vaulted high into the air, swinging a massive warhammer right at 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂's skull. Seeing that flawless, superhuman combat trajectory, 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔂 instantly figured out the truth. This supposedly simple, hammer-swinging blacksmith was secretly an awakened hero. A ferocious clash of sheer power shook the underground forge. As Logger proudly confirmed his heroic status, he furiously called 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂 a filthy demon. He swore on his mighty hammer that this dark intruder would never leave the city alive. To Logger's absolute shock, 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂 just laughed, calling the dwarf a fragile, pathetic insect. In a flash of overwhelming god-tier speed, he grabbed the dwarven hero by the throat. Lifting him off the ground, 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂 proudly announced his true title, the Supreme Demon King. Mere seconds later, heavily armed security forces smashed into the ruined workshop. They had heard the explosive, earth-shattering battle, but the legendary hero was nowhere to be seen. Realizing their master blacksmith had been abducted, they desperately locked down the entire district to hunt down the kidnapper, but their pathetic guards were way too slow. 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂 was already perched high on a dark rooftop, observing the chaotic streets below. His iron grip tightened around Logger's throat, silently threatening the dwarf to keep his mouth totally shut. One wrong word, and the blacksmith would lose his head. Trembling with a mix of absolute fear and burning curiosity, Logger couldn't understand why a terrifying demon king was lurking in 𝒊𝒏𝒈. His mind raced, wrongly concluding that the overlord was obviously here to steal their precious dwarven princess. 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂 rolled his eyes, utterly disgusted by such a cliché assumption. He explicitly stated he couldn't care less about some royal brat. Remembering dark rumors about legendary dwarven escape routes, he coldly ordered Logger to guide him through the secret underground tunnels. The master blacksmith cursed his incredibly rotten luck under his breath. Of all the tragic days to be working, he had to get kidnapped by the most dangerous being on the entire continent. The sheer, oppressive aura of the Demon King drained all of Logger's fighting spirit. Seeing the dwarf freeze up in pure terror, 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂 offered a wicked, manipulative gamble. Guide him out right now, or he'd kidnap the precious dwarf princess instead and leave Logger to rot. Logger violently cursed the Demon King's twisted logic. If the cowardly blacksmith lived while the princess was taken, his legendary career would be instantly vaporized. His own people would ruthlessly torture him to a gruesome death for such a pathetic, cowardly betrayal. Reading the agonizing conflict in the dwarf's eyes, 𝒊𝒂𝒕𝒂 offered a surprisingly formal compromise. He raised his right hand and swore a blood oath upon the Demon King's standard. He promised absolute, unbreakable safety for the blacksmith if he just cooperated. Hearing that sacred, Unholy pledge. 𝒁𝒏 reluctantly surrendered to his fate. Every single being in the realm knew one universal truth. The Demon King's standard was an absolute law, a prideful faith that no true overlord would ever dare to break. Meanwhile, back at the completely trashed workshop, Princess Louis finally arrived, fully expecting to pick up her custom-forged masterpiece weapon. Discovering her absolute favorite blacksmith had been violently kidnapped, royal fury completely exploded. She screamed at the trembling, useless guards, threatening to chop off their heads if they didn't find 𝒁𝒏 immediately. Down in the pitch-black escape tunnels, 𝒂𝒏 clicked his tongue in deep annoyance, already sensing the relentless dwarven pursuit rapidly closing in on them. The Demon King's killing intent flared. Terrified, the dwarf scrambled out of his hiding spot like a frightened rat. Catching his breath, 𝒁𝒏 desperately claimed his part in this was over. But 𝒂𝒏 just unleashed a bone-chilling smirk. He made it terrifyingly clear that he cared nothing for the traditional rules of a demon king. Reality hit the dwarf like a hammer. He cursed himself for not selling out the princess sooner. With his life hanging by a thread, the pathetic hero threw away his pride and begged to serve the very darkness he had sworn to destroy. 𝒂𝒏 mocked the dwarf's supposed heroic title. But honor meant absolutely nothing to 𝒁𝒏 right now. Survival was his only driving force. Amused by this pathetic display of desperation, the absolute evil offered a dark pact. Swear eternal loyalty, and he might just keep his head. Without a second thought, 𝒁𝒏 groveled before the supreme predator. Secretly, he plotted to send an entire army after this bastard the moment he escaped. But fate had a cruel twist waiting. When the dwarf finally opened his eyes, he was trapped in the fourth tower of the demon realm. Seeing this, 𝒂𝒏's loyal subordinate nearly lost his mind. He frantically tried to warn his master about the catastrophic consequences of this kidnapping. Bringing a dwarf into the demon castle was sheer madness. Their race despised demons with a burning passion. And to make matters infinitely worse, this captive was a literal chosen hero. With a single, dominating glare, 𝒂𝒏 commanded absolute silence. Just then, the spy Granada initiated a magical transmission. Seeing the dwarf hero, Granada's jaw hit the floor. Having zero patience for another panic attack, the tyrant simply cut the connection and ordered him to report later. Meanwhile, another captive weakly approached the dwarf, foolishly hoping this was a rescue mission. Still dizzy from the dimensional teleportation, 𝒁𝒏 turned to the towering anti-hero and demanded to know why he was brought to this hellish domain. He naively believed the overlord's mercy meant sweet freedom. A sinister chuckle escaped 𝒂𝒏's lips. He brutally shattered the dwarf's hopes, clarifying that he only promised to keep him breathing. With that grim reality setting in, 𝒁𝒏 questioned how he even crossed the demonic borders. The answer was brutally simple. Knocking the tiny hero unconscious and tossing him into a dimensional pouch was the most logical solution. Snap! The dwarf's last shred of sanity broke, erupting into a hollow, defeated laugh. Realizing escape was absolutely impossible, the broken hero bowed his head and pledged his undying servitude to the darkness. This absolute submission immensely pleased the tyrant. Wasting no time, he issued his first dark decree. The dwarf was to transform the castle's first floor into a death zone filled with massive cannons designed to slaughter any invading heroes. Deep into the night, Granada reconnected through the status window from the Hero Association's outpost. The spy reported that the hero party was actively hoarding fire resistance gear, terrified of the absolute being's legendary black flames. But that was not all. Since the demonic forces had completely vanished, the foolish heroes boldly labeled him a coward hiding in his castle. Hearing this arrogance, a wicked smile crept across 𝒂𝒏's face. His master plan was working perfectly. Starve them of low-level monsters, deny them crucial experience points, and completely shatter their motivation to grow stronger. With his flawless strategy in motion, the Overlord ordered his shadow agent to keep a vigilant eye on their every move. Ending the transmission, Granada shivered at his master's terrifying psychological warfare. No demon king in history had ever understood human nature so perfectly. As he blended back in with the clueless heroes, the spy quietly thanked the heavens that he was standing on the winning side of this war. Back at the demonic fortress, the Overlord granted his new architect absolute freedom to redesign the first floor into a living nightmare. However, there was one impossible condition. 0 mana stones could be used in the traps. The Dwarven Master instantly protested, arguing that conventional traps were completely useless against superhuman awakeners. But the regressor's tactical genius was absolute. He knew these so-called champions possessed monstrous energy-sensing abilities. The second a mana trap charged up, Their hyper-awareness would trigger an instant dodge. The stubborn craftsman tried to argue back, but his master's patience had reached its limit. Destructive black flames erupted into the air. The chilling threat of being replaced instantly silenced the trembling dwarf. Stuttering in pure terror, 𝒊𝒏𝒈 desperately confessed a secret. He had actually invented a revolutionary artifact that completely erased mana signatures. The only catch? It required 3 agonizing years to forge, and the only prototype was sitting back in his distant workshop. The master of deception immediately suspected a trap. Was this pathetic rat trying to orchestrate an escape? He applied crushing pressure to test the dwarf's spirit. But seeing 𝒊𝒏𝒈 hold his ground through sheer desperation, the absolute being decided to place a small wager on him. In a flash, a sinister collar locked securely around 𝒊𝒏𝒈's neck. The overlord casually mentioned its deadly feature. It was a lethal magic tool capable of blowing the dwarf's head off with a simple snap of his fingers. Watching the color drain from his servant's face, 𝒊𝒏𝒈 revealed its secondary function. It was actually a high-tier disguise artifact that would perfectly conceal his heroic identity. But the warning was crystal clear. Attempt to remove it, and his life would be instantly forfeited. Cornered by fate, the fallen hero completely submitted to the lethal accessory. With their dark pact sealed, the duo embarked on a grueling 1-month expedition. They scoured the lands for deadly trap components, hoarding the cursed materials deep within 𝒊𝒏𝒈's dimensional inventory. Their shadowed journey finally led them to Gunfnir. Moving like phantoms, they infiltrated the city and crawled through a hidden underground labyrinth that connected directly to the master blacksmith's domain. Meanwhile, chaos reigned above ground. The bloodthirsty Princess Lys was unleashing absolute hell upon her royal guard. Weeks had passed without a single trace of her missing blacksmith. Trembling soldiers desperately tried to defend themselves, explaining that dwarven craftsmen built endless underground mazes that took agonizing months to fully map out. Furthermore, common sense dictated that the brazen kidnapper and his victim had completely vanished from the kingdom's territory long ago. The unhinged princess reluctantly accepted this logic, but her cruelty knew no bounds. She issued a chilling ultimatum: bring them back in 2 weeks, or every single guard would face the executioner's block. Terrified for their lives, the soldiers sprinted out of the workshop like lightning, leaving the royal tyrant alone to inspect the abandoned forge. Her terrifying grip closed around an unfinished blade left behind on the anvil. With horrifying physical strength, she crushed the solid steel into a useless ball of metal. Her only concern was her own greed. That pathetic dwarf better not be dead before completing her legendary weapon. Speak of the devil! The secret floorboards suddenly creaked open, and 𝒊𝒏𝒈 poked his disguised head out from the hidden passage. Even with the high-tier illusion magic twisting his features, the princess possessed terrifying intuition. Only the master of this shop would know that route. She barked his name with menacing authority, and the traumatized dwarf instinctively squeaked in response. For Lys, the truth was obvious. This lazy coward faked his own kidnapping just to avoid forging her weapon. 𝒊𝒏𝒈 desperately tried to explain the massive misunderstanding. But this muscle-brained royal only spoke the language of violence. Flexing her terrifying aura, she ruthlessly declared that he was now her eternal slave, chained to the anvil until his dying breath. But before the real work could begin, there was a brutal punishment to be served. She menacingly ordered him to clench his teeth. Facing this monstrous physical threat, the legendary hero shrieked like a terrified child. Bam! A devastating force suddenly repelled the monstrous princess. The absolute being had finally stepped out of the shadows. Lys glared at this powerful intruder, her battle instincts flaring. Thanks to his own illusion artifact, the royal nightmare had zero clue she was staring down the demon king himself. Without breaking eye contact with the threat, 𝒊𝒂𝒈 ordered his servant to secure the artifact immediately. He coldly introduced himself as the dwarf's true master. Hearing this bold claim, pure fury ignited in the princess's eyes. This masked bastard was the actual kidnapper who stole her prize. The ground shattered beneath her boots. Lys closed the distance in a millisecond, unleashing a devastating barrage of superhuman punches. But the veteran anti-hero expertly redirected her monstrous strength, effortlessly deflecting and throwing a few punishing counters of his own. Yet, the princess's combat instincts were terrifying. Mid-clash, she violently seized his leg and delivered an earth-shattering blow with the weight of a mountain. The impact sent the masked tyrant crashing through the walls. Dust billowed into the air as she smirked, absolutely certain she had annihilated the trash. Turning her murderous gaze back to the trembling dwarf, she coldly declared he was next. But before the words left her mouth, a dark shadow descended from above. 𝒊𝒂𝒈 mercilessly slammed her head into the stone floor. As the brutal slugfest continued, a shocking realization hit the regressor. Even without a hero's divine blessing, this woman possessed catastrophic power that rivaled the absolute monsters from his past life. And the most terrifying part? The version of her he fought before rewinding time possessed a level of destruction that eclipsed even this. Murderous intent flared in the anti-hero's heart. Should he just execute this future calamity right here and now? But logical calculations instantly cooled his rage. Erasing her would demand completely burning through his remaining demonic energy reserves. Stripped of his former godlike stats, engaging in a deathmatch was a massive gamble. With his current strength heavily restricted, a drawn-out war of attrition would only expose his true identity. The mission objective suddenly shifted. They needed to grab the artifact and vanish into the shadows before this violent confrontation spiraled completely out of control. Thrown back toward Lager, 𝒏𝒈 locked eyes on the Manaphantom. It was a colossal artifact, forged by the dwarf to perfectly mask magical traces. Seeing the dismantle wasn't finished, 𝒏𝒈's aura flared. He gave the terrified blacksmith exactly 1 minute to pack it up. Luis charged at them like a demon clawing out of hell. In that split second, 𝒏𝒈's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. He casually threatened to leave the old dwarf behind to die. The sheer bloodlust in his tone worked like a charm. The panicked blacksmith pushed his hands to the absolute limit. 𝒏𝒈 turned back to face the raging berserker. He calculated his odds. Without his true demonic power and demonic energy, how long could he actually hold the line? Steel clashed violently against steel. Luis screamed her vow to slaughter 𝒏𝒈 and shatter the dwarf's legs so he could never run. 𝒏𝒈 just smirked. He mocked her for sounding more like a demon king than he did, boldly declaring he was taking both the blacksmith and the artifact. Finally, Lager signaled that the dismantling was complete. Luis's fury reached a boiling point, but unfortunately for her, rage breeds carelessness. She left a fatal opening. A devastating kick from 𝒏𝒈 sent her flying. Without missing a beat, he tore open a dimensional space, stored the massive device, and vanished into the escape tunnel with the dwarf. Dwarf guards finally rushed in as backup. Spitting blood, Luis cursed their useless speed and ordered an immediate pursuit down the dark corridor. But the moment they stepped in, boom! The entire tunnel collapsed in a fiery explosion. Staring at the rubble, Luis realized with bitter shock that Lager would rather destroy everything than forge weapons for her. Consumed by wrath, she swore upon her life to hunt him across the continent. Meanwhile, 𝒏𝒈 teleported back to his dark tower. He dropped the massive artifact on the first floor, instantly annoying Gordon, who was busy mopping the stone floors. Gordon grumbled about the colossal hunk of metal, demanding to know what it was. 𝒏𝒈 simply smiled his villainous smile. It was the ultimate countermeasure against the so-called heroes. In mere seconds, the master blacksmith reassembled the core. 𝒏𝒈's eyes narrowed with intimidating pressure, silently demanding results. Sweating nervously, Lager activated the Manaphantom to prove its legendary worth. Instantly, a blinding magical light erupted from the machine. A system prompt appeared before 𝒏𝒈's eyes. It offered to synchronize the weapon directly with his demon tower. The cost? 10,000 points. Even though it nearly wiped out his entire stash, 𝒏𝒈 slammed the confirm button without hesitation. The artifact pulsed with dark energy, recognizing the anti-hero as its absolute master, and seamlessly shifted its power source. When 𝒏𝒈 questioned the dwarf about the sudden transformation, Lager threw his hands up in manic excitement. He denied doing anything, screaming that this anomaly was the discovery of the century. Since the creator himself was clueless, 𝒏𝒈 stepped outside his stronghold to test it. He ordered Princess Ernan to cast her strongest magic. Unleashing her genius, she summoned an overwhelmingly massive elemental fusion. The sheer destructive force tore up the courtyard. This completely shattered Gordon's patience, seeing his freshly cleaned floors ruined again. While Gordon yelled at the princess to stop, 𝒏𝒈 stood frozen in pure awe. An apocalyptic spell of that magnitude should have triggered alarms across the continent. Yet, the outside world felt absolutely nothing. Furthermore, all life signatures inside the tower were completely masked. Realizing the terrifying potential of the Manaphantom, 𝒏𝒈 pushed his control over the tower to the absolute limit. To his absolute shock, he completely erased the tower's existence from reality. Reverting the effect, a wicked grin spread across his face. Despite the heavy demonic energy cost, he now possessed the ultimate illusion to crush the heroes. Returning to the throne room, he found Lager acting like a madman. The dwarf looked ready to tear the tower apart with his bare hands, just to study the magical synchronization. Amused by the obsession, 𝒆𝒂𝒕� granted his permission. But he set one unbreakable condition. The dissection could only happen after this weapon slaughtered the hero party. As the dwarf zealously prayed for the hero's gruesome demise, 𝒆𝒂𝒕 turned his cold gaze to Ernan. He commanded her to hold the fourth floor against the invading vanguard. The royal princess blinked in disbelief, but 𝒆𝒂𝒕 sharply reminded her of her true nature. She was a genius elementalist hiding from her own kingdom. Still, part of him wondered if throwing a sheltered royal into a bloodbath was pushing it too far. But Ernan completely shattered his expectations. Instead of trembling, her eyes gleamed as she coldly analyzed which elemental spells would bring maximum agony to their enemies. Taken aback by her ruthlessness, 𝒆𝒂𝒕 instructed her to simply stand her ground and proudly declare herself as the villain's ally. If she played her part perfectly, he promised to grant her one absolute wish. Ernan accepted the deal in a heartbeat. However, she demanded to be introduced solely as his loyal subordinate, abandoning her royal title completely. 𝒆𝒂𝒕 agreed without a second thought. It was a ridiculously easy condition to meet, and his approval brought a radiant smile to her face. She playfully considered using her devastating beauty to seduce the heroes into a trap, but 𝒆𝒂𝒕 sternly ordered her to stick to the original, lethal script. With his pawns in place, the anti-hero took his dark throne and reviewed every single death trap. Yet, a grim calculation crossed his mind. Even with these flawless preparations, wiping out all 200 awakened heroes was mathematically impossible with their current firepower. He needed to transcend his current limits. Pulling out a hyacinth now dripping with corrupted magic, he realized a terrifying truth. These tainted spirit flowers possessed a lethal anti-demon property. He needed an entire arsenal of them. Without delay, the Demon King and the rogue princess ventured into the wilderness to harvest souls. But after a grueling day of searching the barren wastelands, they came up completely empty-handed. Suddenly, a massive warband of orcs blocked their path. His patience utterly exhausted, 𝒆𝒂𝒕's demonic aura flared, fully prepared to unleash an apocalyptic slaughter upon the monsters. But the unimaginable happened. 𝒊𝒕, the fearsome chieftain, dropped to his knees and bowed his head to the dirt. He begged the Dark Lord to accept his tribe as loyal kin. He confessed that his ancestors had betrayed the demon realm, but they were finally ready to swear eternal blood loyalty. 𝒆𝒂𝒕 sneered at the pathetic display of submission. He saw right through their sweet words. He blatantly accused them of seeking his protection to gain demonic energy, knowing their bodies craved dark magic over pure spirit flowers. Realizing his deception was utterly shattered, 𝒊𝒕 snapped his fingers. His warriors immediately stepped forward, presenting 𝒆𝒂𝒕 with a massive, hoarded bounty of the exact spirit flowers he needed. The anti-hero raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. Not only were these beasts highly articulate, but they were also master manipulators. When interrogated, the chieftain boldly stated that true survival required sharp wisdom, not just brute, savage strength. Staring into the chieftain's calculating eyes, 𝒆𝒂𝒕 felt their raw, desperate ambition. A wicked smirk returned to his face. He actually liked these cunning monsters. Declaring his absolute authority, 𝒆𝒂𝒕 claimed 𝒊𝒕 as his personal vassal. He commanded the Orc Lord to conquer the frozen snowfields and multiply their forces in his name. If they awaited his command and proved their worth, he promised to bestow upon them an evolution far greater than mere strength. 𝒊𝒕 and his savage warriors roared in absolute reverence. They pledged their lives, their souls, and their eternal axes to his dark reign. The wheels of destiny turned. The tower's inner death traps were fully primed, while an endless army of orcs heavily fortified the perimeter. Sitting upon his throne, 𝒆𝒂𝒕's eyes glowed with venomous anticipation. He swore to drown these so-called heroes in the exact same humiliation they forced upon him in his past life. Meanwhile, the hour of judgment approached. Hill and his legendary party finally arrived at Mount 𝑠. Their crusade to annihilate the Demon King's castle had officially begun. As night fell, the heroic vanguard made camp at a border fortress. The local lord hosted a magnificent feast, offering the crusaders one last night of luxury before they marched into the jaws of hell. Hill graciously thanked the fortress lord for the grand hospitality. The old man practically glowed with pride, honored to have his name etched into the history books alongside the legendary saviors. Stepping back, he gestured for the hero leader to deliver a rallying speech. Commanding absolute silence in the great hall, Hill raised his cup, but his eyes were deadly serious. He warned his 200 warriors not to drop their guard for a single second. The eerie silence of the monsters could only mean one thing. The Demon King was already waiting for them. He declared that tomorrow, the Demon King would finally pay in blood for the kidnapping. The main character rallied their fighting spirits, while Granada silently watched the soldiers feast in blissful ignorance. Their numbers remained suspiciously stagnant. This was all thanks to the hero, Hillen, who had ruthlessly coerced a passing merchant guild into joining their suicidal subjugation force. Deep down, Granada felt a twinge of anxiety for the Demon King's tower. Given the sheer, overwhelming scale of the hero's army, the odds were completely stacked against the forces of darkness. The anti-hero even contemplated assassinating a few key players in the shadows to balance the scales. But then reality hit him like a truck. If this crusade actually succeeded, he would finally be free from Beggar's demonic grasp. Slipping perfectly back into his double agent persona, Granada stepped into the cold night air. He immediately connected with Beggar, delivering a precise sit-rep on the army's agonizingly slow progress. Upon hearing that the vanguard had reached the checkpoint, the Demon King issued a chilling directive. Once they marched out, Granada was to sever all communications immediately. But Beggar didn't stop there. He dropped 3 deadly warnings. Beware the snow during the ascent. Never drop your guard when darkness falls. And above all else, stay away from the main gates when the hero finally breaches them. Before Granada could pry for the gruesome details, Hillen materialized from the shadows. Without missing a beat, our anti-hero flashed a deceptive smile, claiming he was just enjoying the night breeze. The hero handed over a flask of fruit wine, sensing the lingering tension in the air. When Granada probed if they could actually slaughter the Demon King, Hillen just let out a hollow laugh. The terrifying truth? Even the overpowered hero wasn't entirely sure. Staring into the abyss of his cup, Hillen confessed the dark reality. Every single Demon King subjugation was a one-way ticket to hell, paved with unpredictable nightmares. Curiosity getting the better of him, Granada brought up the infamous Demon King of Lust. Since Hillen had devoured that monstrous entity's power, surely this new threat would be a walk in the park, right? But the atmosphere instantly froze. A chilling darkness consumed Hillen's expression the moment the gruesome battle against the Lust Demon King was mentioned. Masking his trauma with a bright smile, the hero credited his legendary victory to fearless comrades like Granada, the meat shields who held the blood-soaked front lines. He then formally requested Granada to guard his blind spot, a pact the anti-hero smoothly accepted. The tension dissolving, Hillen led him back toward the warmth of the camp. He casually mentioned that the fortress lord was practically begging to hear tales of their epic exploits. Crossing the threshold, the hero silently acknowledged the weight of his burden. He had tied his fate to these brave souls, and internally prayed that Granada would watch his back when all hell broke loose. As dawn broke, the subjugation army marched toward the treacherous peaks, bathed in the deafening cheers of the townsfolk. But as they navigated a suffocating gorge, a foolish soldier triggered the ultimate death flag, bragging about how flawlessly their advance was going. The idiot actually mocked the forces of darkness, loudly wondering why the monsters were hiding like cowards. A fatal mistake in any fantasy world. Drip. A massive glob of acidic drool splattered onto the earth. Looking up, terror gripped their hearts. A grotesque swarm of gargantuan beasts clung to the cliffs. Panic erupted as the vanguard desperately scrambled into battle formation. Before they could even clash, the earth violently trembled. A colossal ice giant materialized, blocking the entire gorge with its mountain-like presence. The hero immediately roared for the vanguard to fall back. His eyes glowing with predatory intent, Hillen locked onto the towering behemoth. He ordered Commander Watton to evacuate the fodder, boldly declaring he would solo the icy titan. Boom! With a single explosive step, he rocketed toward the colossal monstrosity, scoffing that it was nothing compared to the Demon King of Lust. As the beast swung a devastating blow to crush him, Hillen defied gravity, landing gracefully on its massive arm and sprinting straight up toward its head. Flash! A blinding crescent of sword aura tore through the air, decapitating the titan in one godlike strike. As the colossal corpse crumbled, it perfectly blockaded the chasm, crushing the pursuing monster swarm beneath tons of magical ice. By some miracle, the majority of the army scraped by with their lives. Gasping for breath, the veterans shuddered, realizing this nightmare was already leagues deadlier than the previous Demon King's domain. Yet, their morale skyrocketed. They fell to their knees praising Hillen's absolute dominance, worshipping him for keeping the casualty count incredibly low. Whispers of his legendary feat absorbing the Lust Demon's power spread like wildfire through the ranks. The army's absolute faith in their overpowered hero was cemented. Even Granada couldn't help but admit, the scales of destiny seemed tipped in Hillen's favor. Just as they began to regroup, scouts spotted a pathetic band of orcs lurking nearby. Smirking at the easy prey, the hero drew his blade, ready to eradicate the low-level trash. "Stop!" Granada practically ripped the hero back. A sinister rumble echoed through the peaks, and 𝒏𝒈's first chilling warning about the snow flashed in his mind like a death sentence. The Demon King's mocking voice practically whispered in the wind, promising they would never even reach the tower. Roar! A catastrophic avalanche tore down the mountain, cursing 𝒏𝒈's twisted mind to the darkest depths of hell. Granada realized there was zero tactical evasion. He screamed at the top of his lungs, ordering everyone to run for their miserable lives. Miles away in his dark throne room, 𝒏𝒈 watched the frozen massacre unfold with absolute glee. A wicked smirk crawled across his face, swearing that this time, the so-called heroes were nothing but prey to be hunted. Staring into his magical projection, the Demon King chuckled darkly. He had technically warned his spy about the snow, conveniently leaving out that the sacrificial orcs were rigged to trigger a mountain-shattering avalanche. The White Death swept the vanguard straight down into the abyssal valley. Shattered and freezing, they desperately scrambled to find survivors. But 𝒏𝒈's second warning became reality. As night fell, hordes of orcs unleashed demonic beasts and ice giants upon their broken formation. This relentless symphony of despair continued for 3 agonizing days. The blood-soaked snow painted a grim picture. By day 3, their mighty force of over 500 elite soldiers had been slaughtered down to half. Dragging their mangled bodies to the summit, the hope finally shattered. They frantically searched for the Demon King's castle, only to find an empty, frozen wasteland. Pushed past his breaking point, Hillen roared into the blizzard, his mind fracturing from the sheer despair. Recognizing the futility of this cursed march, Commander Wotan stepped up, becoming the voice of the dying men. He officially declared a full retreat. The hero violently objected, but Wotan stood his ground with iron resolve, reminding him that the lives of his brothers in arms meant more than blind glory. Fast forward to day 6 of this hellish expedition. The brutal, unforgiving terrain had claimed its toll. What was once a vanguard of over 200 was now a pitiful squad of barely 50 walking corpses. But then, the looming silhouette of the Demon King's castle finally pierced the valley's fog. Blinded by vengeance, the battered survivors charged the grand entrance, bursting open the heavy doors, expecting to slaughter low-level mobs. 𝒏𝒈's third and final apocalyptic warning triggered. Boom! 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 An unprecedented, concentrated artillery strike rained absolute devastation upon them. In mere seconds, the casualty counter plummeted from 52, down to exactly 1 lone survivor. Well, technically 2, since the cunning Granada had perfectly dodged the explosion. Shell-shocked and covered in ash, Hillen stumbled into the ruined first floor. He screamed into the void, mind utterly broken by how this new Demon King completely ignored every established narrative trope. Spotting Granada emerging from the smoke unharmed, a twisted glint of madness returned to the hero's eyes. Hillen fiercely ordered his comrade to follow him to the top. He arrogantly claimed that as a duo, they possessed more than enough firepower to annihilate the mastermind. After all, the catastrophic energy of the Lust Demon King still pulsed violently through his veins, demanding absolute destruction. Ascending to the 2nd and 3rd floors, Hillen's fury reached a boiling point. The rooms were completely desolate. Why would a demon lord leave the interior undefended while packing the outside with armies? Meanwhile, Granada practically rolled his eyes, knowing exactly what ridiculous scenario awaited them. Reaching the 4th floor, Granada let out a heavy, exasperated sigh. On the flip side, the overpowered hero stopped dead in his tracks, completely dumbfounded by the bizarre sight before him. Stepping out of the shadows, a girl named Nan struck a dramatic pose in full Gothic attire. With maximum theatrical energy, she proudly introduced herself as the Dark Spirit Summoner, one of the fearsome 4 heavenly kings guarding the supreme ruler. Second-hand embarrassment hit Granada like a physical blow. Unable to handle the sheer cringe of her intense roleplay, the anti-hero instinctively took a few steps backward, praying to melt into the scenery. Completely thrown off, Hillen demanded to know why she looked so different. Flustered, she stubbornly insisted he had the wrong person. To prove her terrifying might, she unleashed a catastrophic, multi-elemental barrage right at his face. Deflecting the massive strike, the hero instantly deduced the chilling truth. She wasn't under mind control at all. The so-called hero remembered the blood and sweat shed to save her. Yet here she was, turning her blade against her very savior. His mind snapped. Consumed by blazing wrath, Hillen vowed to reduce everything to ashes. but a chilling shadow swallowed the light. 𝒆𝒂𝒕� materialized right behind him, his demonic form radiating an overwhelming aura. "Do you really think you can?" the Demon King whispered, his voice dripping with absolute mockery. Black hellfire erupted from the demon's palm, swallowing the hero's space. "I finally get to see your pathetic face," 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 smirked, unfazed by the devastating heat. Hillen locked eyes with the elf, Granada, standing just a few paces away. The hero dashed toward him, screaming for a combined strike to slay the Demon King. The elf blinked in pure confusion. How do we even fight that monster? But before he could finish, his life force was violently ripped away. Granada collapsed to the cold ground, gasping for breath, while Hillen's aura exploded, overflowing with the stolen elven mana. The corrupted hero grinned down at the fallen elf. "This is what I meant by fighting together," he sneered. Watching the sinister display, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 instantly saw through the trick. The hero had activated a cursed artifact to devour his own comrade's magical energy. Flaunting the sinister glow on his finger, Hillen revealed its true name. It was the legendary artifact known as the Elf Eater, a demonic tool designed to convert elven life force into absolute, limitless mana. The terrifying catch? The host dies shortly after activation. Crushing Granada beneath his boot, the hero callously confessed that using the elf as a mere battery was his grand master plan from the very beginning. As despair shattered Granada's soul, the Demon King simply smiled. 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 found twisted amusement in the hero's absolute scum-like nature. Crossing his arms, the anti-hero made a bold declaration. If he severed that cursed ring from the hero's hand, all that stolen power would instantly vanish. Overflowing with arrogance, Hillen dared the Demon King to try. "Even the Demon King of Lust failed to break my defense," he boasted. But in that exact fraction of a second, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 whispered a single name: Gordon. A flash of unseen steel, and the hero's wrist was cleanly severed from his arm. Time seemed to freeze. It took 3 whole seconds for the hero's brain to process the devastating reality. An agonizing scream tore from his lungs as blood painted the floor. Clutching his bleeding stump, he was paralyzed by pure terror. He had not sensed even a trace of the attacker's aura. Emerging from the absolute void stood Gordon, a supreme high-ranking demon. Looming right behind the trembling hero, he coldly commanded him to shut his mouth. Driven by primal survival instincts, Hillen desperately leaped backward. His mind spiraled into absolute chaos. How could a mere subordinate, not even a demon king, nearly claim his life? But his nightmare was far from over. A heavy, terrifying hand clamped onto his shoulder. It was 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂, his true executioner, whispering that escape was an absolute impossibility. Whipping around in sheer panic, the hero's instincts screamed at him to dodge. But the sight before him shattered his fighting spirit. 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 was effortlessly wielding a colossal sphere of destructive demonic energy. In that fatal heartbeat, Hillen knew it was over. All defiance crumbled into dust. Surrendering to his inevitable doom, he could only stare blankly as 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 announced the final judgment. Without a shred of mercy, the Demon King smashed the apocalyptic black sun into the hero. The impact triggered a cataclysmic explosion that shook the very foundations of the tower. As the apocalyptic dust finally settled, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 shifted back into his human guise. He offered a mock round of applause, praising the shattered hero for barely clinging to life. Turning his back on the pathetic sight, he ordered Gordon to throw Hillen into the absolute depths of the dungeon, alongside the other trash knocked out by Logger's devastating arsenal. Meanwhile, the betrayed elf was literally knocking on heaven's door. But fate, or rather, the Demon King, had other plans. 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 forcefully pulled Granada back from the brink of death by feeding him a priceless spirit flower. Blinking away the darkness, the elf woke up just in time to see 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 tossing another divine flower to Anan. The anti-hero then turned to Logger, granting him absolute freedom to do as he pleased with the tower. With a casual nod, he commended his dark subordinates for a flawless victory, ordered them to hold their respective floors, and walked away as if he had just taken a stroll in the park. Granada stared at the retreating back with absolute, unquestioning reverence. To easily crush a legendary hero like a mere bug was nothing short of divine power. However, a sharp gaze noticed a subtle tremble. The shadows whispered a different truth. Was the almighty Demon King actually exhausted? The illusion of absolute dominance shattered the moment 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 crossed the threshold of the 5th floor. His legs gave way. Crashing onto the cold stone, he gasped desperately for air. The untouchable mastermind cursed under his breath, admitting that monstrous battle had nearly drained every last drop of his stamina. A bitter frustration gnawed at his pride. He had been forced to burn through his absolute limits, just to crush Hillen. And the most infuriating part? That arrogant trash was merely one of the weakest members among the legendary 10 stars. It was an absolute joke that the entire continent's forces had never managed to execute him. The harsh reality of his system interface mocked him. With his pitifully low demonic points, spamming supreme spells was impossible. That was exactly why he had orchestrated such a devious, psychological master plan. He had to meticulously strip away the hero's sanity and stamina, fueling his blind rage until his tactical vision was completely destroyed. Still, a terrifying smirk crept across his face. Against all catastrophic odds, he had orchestrated a flawless, undisputed victory, and he did it all using pure cunning and strategy, entirely defying the brute force standards of a traditional demon king. This single bloody triumph proved one absolute truth. He possessed the power to shatter his destined doom and rain absolute vengeance upon the hypocritical heroes. Meanwhile, far across the continent, Wotan and his battered forces dragged themselves back to Hunter W. The moment they arrived, a massive, raging mob of civilians demanded a press conference, screaming for answers. Fury erupted like a volcano when the masses learned the bitter truth. The mighty heroes had retreated without even catching a glimpse of the demonic stronghold. The public outrage was absolutely devastating. After all, rivers of gold, desperate hopes, and countless resources had been blindly poured into this holy crusade. As the crushing waves of blame crashed down, Wotan stepped up to the podium, trying to salvage their shattered pride. "Hillen has not returned," he declared to the furious crowd. He spun a desperate lie, claiming the supreme hero was still hunting the Dark Tower, begging the masses to just wait a little longer. Like a terrifying plague, the scandalous news infected the entire continent. Deep within his golden palace, King Hindaran exploded into a royal frenzy, furious that his precious daughter remained unrescued. On the other hand, the assassin Louise could not care less about the drama. Her lethal focus remained solely on hunting down Logger. But human nature is a breeding ground for absolute chaos. The rumors rapidly mutated, twisting into terrifying tales of absolute despair. Whispers of Hillen's gruesome death echoed through the streets, plunging the entire world into a suffocating ocean of sorrow. Oh, but human despair is the sweetest nectar for a villain. That colossal wave of negative energy fed directly into 𝑫𝒆𝒐𝒏's system, causing his demonic points to absolutely skyrocket. While the Demon King harvested their misery, Wotan was urgently dragged before the Supreme Council of Heroes. The atmosphere in the Grand Hall was suffocating. With absolutely zero intelligence on 𝑫𝒆𝒐𝒏's domain, and Hillen entirely missing in action, the council was backed into a corner. They issued a tense 10-day ultimatum, clinging to the pathetic hope of their hero's triumphant return. After all, a legendary 10-star warrior could not just vanish, right? But the council's fallback plan was pure, absolute madness. If the Golden Boy failed to show his face, they would unleash the continent's ultimate trumpet card. All 4,728 awakened heroes would be mobilized for an apocalyptic holy war to wipe the new Demon King off the face of the earth. Back in the suffocating abyss of the demonic dungeon, 𝑫𝒆𝒐𝒏 paid a little visit to his prized captive. Unsurprisingly, the roach-like hero had already healed from his fatal wounds. As the Demon King casually mocked his living conditions, Hillen spat blood and demanded he cut the small talk. Sparing a holy hero's life? It was an anomaly that defied all logic. A sinister smile played on 𝑫𝒆𝒐𝒏's lips as he dropped the absolute bombshell. He didn't just want the hero defeated. He demanded Hillen's absolute submission as his loyal hunting dog. The sheer audacity of the demand short-circuited the hero's brain. A holy star, bowing to the darkness? It was an offer completely beyond human comprehension. Instead of torturing him physically, the anti-hero delivered a psychological masterstroke. A heavy sack of gold crashed onto the dungeon floor. 𝑫𝒆𝒐𝒏 smoothly broke down the brutal economics of heroism. Launching a holy crusade was an insanely expensive gamble, entirely bankrolled by greedy merchant guilds and power-hungry nobles. Win, and you bathe in infinite glory, the Demon King whispered venomously. But fail? You become a slave to absolute, crushing debt. And Hillen was the golden goose. Every single coin of that colossal investment rested entirely on his now severed shoulders. The terrifying reality crashed over the hero like a tidal wave. He had utterly failed. Even if he miraculously escaped this dark abyss, he would be publicly crucified as a massive disappointment. Stripped of his glory, he would be ruthlessly hunted by debt collectors until the end of his pathetic days. Realization struck the fallen hero. It was the elf! Granada had leaked his pathetic financial ruin to the enemy. Furious, Hillen spat the word traitor with pure venom, but those hollow words absolutely infuriated the battered elf standing in the shadows. Granada stepped into the light, eyes blazing with righteous disgust. "A backstabbing parasite like you, calling me a traitor?" The elf scoffed, before dropping his own terrifying truth. His absolute loyalty had belonged to the Demon King all along. Taking the stage, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 delivered the final psychological blow. The pathetic heroes were losing because they had never faced a villain with a brain like his. However, the mastermind was always 10 steps ahead. He knew the holy forces would eventually adapt to his brilliant strategies. To maintain absolute control, he needed an inside man. And who better to sabotage the righteous forces from within than one of their most celebrated, legendary stars? As he unveiled his diabolical master plan, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 materialized a terrifying artifact in his palm. It was the legendary Aman gem, pulsating with an ominous, dark energy. An absolute nightmare of an item designed to bind a subordinate's soul. It allowed the master to monitor their every thought, instantly executing them if they dared harbor an ounce of treason. 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 coldly ordered the hero to swallow it without a fight, but Hillen chuckled darkly, boasting that his divine, awakened body would instinctively reject such filthy demonic magic. Too bad for the arrogant hero. His former battery pack was now his ultimate ruin. Granada coldly informed his dark master that the holy rejection only triggered through conscious willpower. Without a second of hesitation, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 violently forced the demonic gem straight down the gagging hero's throat. As the terrifying dark magic began to bind the hero's soul, Granada watched the agonizing display. A seed of doubt crossed the elf's mind. "My lord, what if his pride forces a rejection, and he actually dies?" he asked cautiously. A low, chilling laugh escaped the anti-hero's lips. He guaranteed that outcome was absolutely impossible. A self-serving, narcissistic piece of trash like Hillen would never choose noble martyrdom over his pathetic life. And just like clockwork, the system interface flashed blood red. The holy hero was officially branded as a demonic hunting dog. Tears of pure humiliation streamed down Hillen's face as he cursed his own pathetic will to survive. As the chaotic day finally bled into a dark night, the mastermind held a war council with his supreme demon, Gordon. The loyal lieutenant raised a massive red flag. Their shiny new spy was completely paralyzed by a staggering, soul-crushing bounty of 100,000 gold coins. Pointing out the harsh economic reality, Gordon reminded his lord that their profits from farming demonic energy were absolute pocket change compared to that astronomical mountain of debt. The loyal demon stared at his master, completely bewildered. "My lord, exactly how do you plan to pull off such an impossible heist?" A sinister smirk crept across 𝒆𝒂𝒕𝒂's face. He casually announced the arrival of a crucial message. The annual Tower Conference of the Demon Kings was about to begin. In his past life, our anti-hero completely despised this pathetic gathering. But things were different now. These ancient rulers had been hoarding gold for centuries, and their grand treasuries were ripe for the taking. Watching his master's bold move, Gordon remained unusually silent. Instead of his typical panic, the subordinate finally realized his lord's terrifying potential. Sure, his master's methods were absolutely ruthless, but the results spoke for themselves. As the official invitation materialized, 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 commanded Gordon to follow. It was time to scam those arrogant ancient beings. They arrived at the legendary Tower of Lies. Stepping onto the 13th floor, the heavy atmosphere hit them instantly. The supreme rulers of the demon realm were already seated and waiting. "Talking about me behind my back?" 𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 sneered. Draxon's eyes blazed with fury as he spat out the rookie's name. But 𝒔, the cold sovereign of winter, calmly noted that our protagonist loved being the center of attention. Then there was 𝒂𝒂𝒂, the immortal monarch. He glared at the newcomer with pure killing intent, still enraged by how 𝒆𝒂𝒕𝒂 had completely humiliated their sacred traditions. Finally, Jason, the Lord of Lies, offered a fake, cheerful welcome. But our overpowered main character didn't hold back. He called them all pathetic fools, mocking them for disgracing the Demon King title. This blatant disrespect made 𝒂𝒂𝒂 explode, roaring at the rookie for crossing the line. Sensing the immortal's overwhelming bloodlust, 𝒆𝒂𝒂𝒂 ruthlessly pushed the one-eyed monster's buttons even further. A deadly clash seemed absolutely inevitable, but with a single, resounding clap, Jason instantly shattered the explosive tension. The Lord of Lies demanded absolute cooperation, warning them not to waste his precious time. 𝒆𝒂𝒂𝒂's eyes narrowed in shock, How did Jason erase that immense killing intent so effortlessly? His strategic mind raced to analyze the situation. Was this Jason's terrifying innate power? Or was he drawing strength directly from the Tower of Lies itself? Taking his seat, 𝒆𝒐𝒏 sharply evaluated this mysterious authority. It felt remarkably similar to his own phantom mana synchronization. Against such a dangerous opponent, his guard was now raised to the absolute maximum. Jason officially commenced the Dark Summit, opening the floor for discussion. Breaking the heavy silence, Draxon immediately targeted our anti-hero, demanding to know the exact whereabouts of Hand. Meanwhile, down in the reception hall, the enemy aides cornered Gordon with the exact same question. But playing his part perfectly, Gordon smooth-talked them, lying that Hand never entered their domain and was just wandering like a stray dog. The rival assistants scoffed in disbelief. A master tracker like Hand should have sensed their stronghold from miles away. But Gordon dropped a brilliant excuse. His master openly defied every traditional Demon King rule, recalling 𝒆𝒐𝒏's insane coronation stunts. The rival aides completely bought the lie. Gordon smirked internally. His master had strictly ordered him to keep Hand a secret, aiming to use that pathetic pawn as a double agent. Everything was playing out exactly as the main character calculated. Though deeply impressed by his lord's dark genius, Gordon played the victim perfectly, loudly complaining to the others about his tyrant of a boss. Venting his fake frustrations, Gordon felt a weirdly satisfying thrill wash over him. It was the ultimate gossip session, and the best part? The rival assistants completely dropped their guard. They eagerly joined in, trash-talking their own terrifying masters without a second thought. Who knew underworld politics just required a little emotional support? Meanwhile, back in the high-stakes summit, 𝒆𝒐𝒏 smoothly delivered his alibi. Hand never found his fortress, simply because our unpredictable main character refused to build it on some cliché mountain peak. As the ancient being swallowed his perfectly crafted lie, Jason leaned in with a sharp gaze. He questioned if their enemies were still hunting for 𝒆𝒐𝒏's hidden base. After all, leaving one's domain completely defenseless during a summit was basically a death sentence in the demon realm. It was the most fundamental rule of survival. A sovereign without a throne faces ultimate destruction. But our arrogant anti-hero just scoffed, bluntly telling the Lord of Lies to back off. He had his own supreme methods of absolute defense. He clearly saw right through Jason's cheap provocation. Jason immediately raised his hands in a fake surrender. However, Draxon's aura flared wildly, warning the rookie that such arrogance would lead to his doom. Our absolute menace of a main character didn't even flinch. He ruthlessly roasted the ancient vampire lord right to his face. Seething with rage, the elders moved on. As the boring debates dragged out, 𝒆𝒐𝒏 smirked in the shadows. Let them suspect him all they wanted. His true master plan remained safely hidden in the dark. Besides, he hadn't forgotten his real objective for enduring this circus. He was here to squeeze 100,000 gold pieces straight out of these ancient fossils. Watching the council bicker, 𝒆𝒐𝒏's piercing gaze locked onto Jason. This guy's network was terrifying. To eavesdrop on absolute sovereigns and track their critical mana deficits, he had to hold immense authority within the hierarchy. Suddenly, a subtle gesture caught his eye. Jaina, the Winter Sovereign, was quietly signaling him. Slipping away from the chaos, they stepped onto the shadowy balcony for a secret exchange. Under the pale moonlight, her icy exterior melted just a fraction. She confessed her long-standing desire to speak with him, boldly admitting that his rebellious ideologies actually resonated with her. 𝒆𝒐𝒏 was genuinely caught off guard. Was this cold beauty always this open-minded? She quickly clarified her loyalty to the ancient traditions, but firmly stated that the demon realm desperately needed to adapt and evolve. Her piercing gaze swept over our dark hero. She admitted he was much more intriguing in person. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed him her personal communication artifact, a direct lifeline to the Sovereign of Winter herself. But there was one strict condition. If he wanted her powerful backing, he had to stop trashing their sacred laws right to her face. As she turned to leave, 𝒆𝒐𝒏 casually dropped a question about Jason. Her expression darkened instantly. The Lord of Lies was completely unreadable, far more dangerous than Draxon or Uga combined. Watching her walk away, our anti-hero smirked. Trusting her was out of the question, but she was definitely an epic, unexpected piece on his chessboard. Meanwhile, back at our protagonist's fortress, a much more wholesome scene was unfolding. Nan had just baked a fresh batch of magical cookies, eagerly asking Logger to be her first taste tester. Knowing the fierce Demon King himself had hunted down the ingredients, the loyal subordinate bravely accepted his fate. He prepared to praise her cooking skills, fully expecting the taste to be an absolute disaster. But the moment he took a bite, his eyes shot wide open. An explosion of divine flavor sent a shockwave straight through his mana core. Showered with his genuine praise, Nan cheerfully revealed her secret ingredient. She had casually tossed ultra-rare spirit flowers into the dough. Logger's jaw dropped to the floor. Why waste such an incredibly priceless treasure on snacks? But Nan just smiled warmly. It was a heartfelt gift to strengthen their bonds. Since their destinies were now tied together for the long run, she excitedly hoped Granada and their terrifying master would enjoy the treats. Cutting back to the tense atmosphere of the Tower of Lies, 𝑫𝒆𝒐𝒂𝒕🔂 finally returned to the summit chamber. But the room was dead silent. Only Jason remained in the shadows. The other ancient monsters had already vanished. The Lord of Lies gestured toward a steaming pot of tea. A sinister smile played on his lips. They had some highly classified business to discuss. Our main character's mind raced, analyzing every possibility. What could this tricky bastard possibly want? Then, Jason dropped an absolute bombshell. He knew exactly how desperate 𝑫𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 was for human currency. For a split second, our overpowered protagonist froze. The revelation hit like a ton of bricks. How on earth did such top-secret information leak out? Instantly masking his shock with an icy glare, 𝑫𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 played dumb, demanding to know what nonsense Jason was spouting. But the veteran schemer just laughed. The act was useless. Draxon had completely sold out the rookie's secret earlier. Cutting the small talk, Jason laid his trap. He offered a mountain of human wealth, demanding a massive chunk of mana points in exchange. This was literally everything our anti-hero had been plotting for. Yet, alarm bells were screaming in his head. The King of Lies never played fair, and this generous offer definitely hid a venomous motive. However, a master strategist knows when to take a calculated risk. Starved for funds to build his empire, our demonic main character sealed the dangerous pact. With the shady transaction locked in, 𝑫𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 swaggered back to his dark domain. His pockets were heavily lined with human gold, effortlessly tossing the promised fortune right into Hill's waiting hands. The next phase of his grand domination had officially begun. Staring at the massive mountain of wealth, Hillen's eyes widened in absolute shock. The Demon King had actually kept his word. But 𝑫𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂's crimson gaze was cold as ice. He commanded his new pawn to erase every single trace of the money's true origin. The Overlord knew the terrifying stakes all too well. If that bastard Jason caught even a whiff of this cash flow, he would predict their every move. They would be reduced to nothing but pathetic puppets dancing on his strings. Therefore, moving in absolute darkness was their only option. To bolster his hidden forces, 𝑫𝒆𝒂𝒕🔂 did not just enslave the fallen hero. He completely corrupted the remaining human survivors, forcefully awakening them as his loyal dark knights and shadow mages. He then tossed the reins of this undead legion to his new puppet. Hillen's orders were absolute. He was to use these brainwashed husks to multiply their wealth, since their shattered souls were now programmed to obey his every command. Even in this living hellscape, the naive hero clung to a foolishly optimistic hope. He convinced himself that since so many lives were spared, this expedition was not a total failure. In his delusional mind, he could still reclaim his glorious title once the massive debt was paid in full. Bloated with this misplaced arrogance, he actually dared to extend his hand toward the Overlord. He called it a celebration of their new business partnership. In a flash, the Demon King's killing intent erupted like a volatile volcano. A crushing, invisible force brought the arrogant hero straight to his knees in agonizing pain. 𝑫𝒆𝒂𝒕𝒂's voice dripped with absolute malice. There was no partnership here. He demanded the pathetic human learn his place and grovel like the lowly slave he truly was. Disgusted by the sight of him, the Demon King banished the hero from his presence. But just before Hillen dragged his broken body away, Anon quietly slipped from the shadows. She thrust a sealed letter into his hands, destined for Elena, the 13th princess. The hero's boiling resentment finally spilled over. He gritted his teeth in sheer frustration, demanding to know why a holy saintess would betray humanity to stand with the ultimate evil. In his furious eyes, her treason was the very reason he suffered such crushing humiliation. Hearing his pathetic whining, her expression softened with a brief, gentle apology. Yet, her resolve remained unshaken like a mountain. She stared him dead in the eye, declaring that returning to that corrupted kingdom was no longer a path she would walk. She leaned in and whispered of a dark, twisted secret buried deep within the Hinduran kingdom. Hillen's breath instantly caught in his throat. He had heard those dark whispers before, but always brushed them off as mere tavern gossip until this very moment. As the horrifying truth finally washed over him, the puzzle pieces snapped into place. Realizing the heavy burden she carried, his anger melted away into reluctant understanding. With a heavy sigh, the the fallen hero swore on his honor to deliver the crucial message. As the tragic remnants of the human expedition vanished into the distance, Gordon stepped forward with heavily furrowed brows. The loyal subordinate questioned his master's judgment, deeply paranoid that the rebellious hero would eventually shatter his chains and betray them. But a wicked, knowing smirk danced across Beria's lips. He saw right through the human's pathetic soul. Unlike those greedy mortals enslaved by glittering gold, this particular hero was chained by something far more intoxicating. He was absolutely addicted to the toxic drug of fame and glory. To harness a pawn burning with such blinding ambition was the ultimate strategy for absolute victory. Just as the Demon King finished his brilliant deduction, Anon cheerfully shattered the heavy atmosphere. She skipped into the room, holding out a tray of freshly baked cookies with a blinding smile. Watching her waltz into his throne room like she owned the place, Beria twitched with sheer, unadulterated annoyance. Had he been far too merciful to this human pet? His dark aura flared as he delivered a ruthless ultimatum. If these treats tasted like garbage, she would rot in the abyssal dungeon for an entire month. Completely unfazed by the threat of eternal darkness, she simply nudged the tray closer. He took a single, reluctant bite. Suddenly, a wave of divine ecstasy exploded through his demonic veins. The overwhelming sensation nearly shattered his ironclad self-control, forcing him to violently suppress the surging magical energy. His razor-sharp senses instantly detected the hidden truth. She had ground priceless spirit flowers straight into the dough. Narrowing his crimson eyes, the overlord saw right through her sweet bribery. He demanded to know exactly what kind of ridiculous favor she was plotting to ask. Meanwhile, far from the suffocating demon realm, the broken heroes' party successfully descended the treacherous mountain peaks, safely guided by their monstrous escorts. Upon reaching the border town of Honren, they wasted zero time. They immediately stepped into the ancient teleportation circle, warping straight toward the heart of the Hindaran kingdom. On the completely opposite side of the board, the fearsome elf mercenary kicked open the doors of the Blood Eagle Guild. The time for mercy had long passed. He had returned to carve some bloody, ruthless discipline into the cowards who dared to abandon the battlefield. His fists flew like lightning, delivering brutal, bone-crunching punishment. How dare these pathetic worms turn their backs on their own captain? They had fled like terrified rats in the face of true despair, valuing their miserable little lives over the guild's sacred honor. Amidst the chaotic symphony of breaking bones and terrified screams, a sudden presence commanded the entire room's attention. A young girl confidently stepped through the splintered doorway. With her chin held high, she boldly declared herself to be 𝒊𝒏𝒈, a hero chosen by the heavens. She pompously explained that unavoidable circumstances had delayed her grand debut. But now, she was finally ready to join the legendary expedition. Trembling under their captain's furious gaze, the beaten mercenaries quickly chimed in. They revealed that this very girl had been generously paying off their massive tavern tabs. The fierce elf offered a stiff, formal nod of gratitude for her financial charity. But his very next words struck like a freezing blade. He bluntly informed her that the Grand Crusade was already over in catastrophic failure. The mighty Hillen had already packed up and abandoned the frontier town completely. The young hero's eyes trembled with pure, unfiltered disbelief. Frantic and agitated, she desperately demanded every single detail of this impossible defeat. Suppressing a wicked smirk, the undercover mercenary agreed to weave the tale. However, he fed her nothing but the carefully crafted lies perfectly scripted by the overlord himself. Swallowing the dramatic fabrication completely whole, 𝒊𝒏𝒈 bowed her head in solemn gratitude. Before turning her back to the grim and bloody guild hall, she tossed a handful of gleaming silver coins onto the table, a meager tribute for the tragic tale she had just been spoon-fed. The exact second her shadow disappeared, a greedy lackey lunged for the scattered silver like a starving beast. He muttered some disgusting, sleazy comment about the naive girl, but before his grubby fingers could even brush the metal, a terrifying grip clamped onto his wrist, catching him red-handed. Peering through the cracked, dusty window, the sharp-eyed elf caught something completely out of the ordinary. The supposed rookie hero was not wandering alone. A highly elite squadron of heavily armored guards was shadowing her every single step. The hair on the back of his neck stood straight up. Despite wearing full-plate steel, those knights did not make a single, solitary sound. Throwing on a stealth cloak, the master tracker vanished into the shadows to tail them. Eavesdropping from the dark alleyways, the shocking truth hit him. This runaway was not just some starry-eyed rookie. She was a royal princess, abandoning everything to play the hero. But even a veteran's legendary instincts have blind spots. Without a single ripple of mana warning him, the freezing edge of a lethal blade materialized out of thin air, pressing dangerously against his exposed throat. A chilling, authoritative voice echoed from his blind spot. A monstrously imposing knight had completely bypassed his supreme stealth. The juggernaut demanded his true identity, roaring to know why a filthy rat was stalking the royal princess. And the deadly interrogation was only just beginning. The terrifying knight cross-examined his usage of such sinister cloaking magic, highly suspicious that he was a deadly assassin sent by a rival empire. Cold sweat dripped down the elf's face. Being exposed as a political spy was bad enough, but if they uncovered his true master was the Demon King himself, he was as good as dead. His brilliant tactical mind raced at light speed to formulate a flawless alibi, but diplomacy was completely off the table. Judging the silent intruder as an absolute, immediate threat, the towering knight unleashed a devastating, murderous strike without another word. Boom! The deafening shockwave of the magical clash ripped through the quiet streets. The entire royal vanguard instantly whipped around, locking onto the fleeing elf mercenary. Branded as a high-value assassin, a furious storm of flashing steel and destructive magic rained down upon him. Cornered like a desperate, wounded beast, his mind spun completely out of control. He was the only elf residing in this cursed frontier town. If he unleashed his signature racial arts, his deep cover was permanently blown. But staring down the barrels of elite royal knights, holding back meant his absolute gruesome death. The captain of the guard desperately ordered their precious princess to fall back to safety, but her eyes blazed with foolish, unchecked arrogance. Declaring that a true hero never retreats, she unsheathed her gleaming weapon, diving headfirst into the chaotic fray to execute the cornered mercenary. Left with absolutely zero options, he finally prepared to unleash his hidden elven aura. But out of nowhere, the very fabric of reality warped. A massive wall of catastrophic black flames erupted, completely incinerating the attacker's path. Stepping casually out of the blazing inferno was the Demon King himself, casually asking why his pawn was slacking off on the job. The absolute terror of that overwhelming dark aura suffocated the royal knights. They instantly recognized the living nightmare standing right before them. The supreme overlord had descended. Meanwhile, the battered elf fought the urge to scream in sheer, unadulterated frustration. How dare his boss call him lazy when he was literally fighting for his pathetic life? The royal vanguard immediately jumped to the most terrifying, apocalyptic conclusion. The ultimate evil had personally come to abduct their precious royal bloodline. Gripping their trembling weapons, the fiercely loyal knights formed an impenetrable wall of flesh and steel, fully prepared to burn their souls to protect her. But the delusional princess saw this legendary encounter entirely differently. With blinding foolishness, she commanded her men to launch a full-scale assault, viewing the overlord as nothing but a stepping stone for her mythic legend. 𝒆𝒐𝒏 blinked in genuine, utter confusion. He honestly had zero clue a royal princess was even in this trashy town, though the paranoid soldiers absolutely refused to believe him. The sheer, mind-numbing absurdity of the situation piqued. The enraged knights, the naive princess, and even his own bleeding subordinate, all screamed the exact same question. Just what the hell was the Demon King doing here? When 𝒆𝒐𝒏 nonchalantly replied that he was literally just running a quick grocery errand, their collective jaws hit the floor in mind-shattering shock. The ridiculous, anticlimactic truth was rooted mere minutes in the past. Still reeling from the heavenly taste of those baked treats, the overlord had begrudgingly asked his human pet to name her price. Without missing a single beat, the saintess boldly ordered the supreme ruler of darkness to go fetch her some mystical Ken powder. The overlord's vast, ancient knowledge instantly recognized the obscure artifact. This incredibly rare powder was a supreme catalyst for forging spiritual contracts. It was concocted over a century ago by a legendary elven alchemist, a notorious traitor who had abandoned the mystic woods to serve the greedy human empire. That brilliant, twisted traitor had been chained by human kings, forced to dedicate his entire existence to a single, impossible quest. His life's work was synthesizing the ultimate magical elixirs that would allow pathetic, monolith mortals to force contracts with divine nature spirits. The Demon King scoffed at the utterly ridiculous, demanding request. A once-in-a-generation spiritual genius like her certainly did not need petty mortal shortcuts, but putting on her best puppy dog eyes, she played the innocent, helpless victim. She shamelessly complained that his suffocating, dark tower was completely drained of nature's mana, making the magical powder an absolute, life-or-death necessity. 𝒆𝒐𝒏 saw right through her intentions. He knew exactly what Nan was plotting. She wanted to forge a contract with a new, high-tier spirit. In her past life, she achieved this impossible feat at the age of 27. The entire continent had trembled at the news, as only a chosen few could ever reach such heights. But now, she was trying to awaken this power a whole 7 years earlier than destined. She stared at the Demon King in absolute shock. She had planned to keep it a secret to surprise him, but nothing could escape his piercing gaze. Internally, 𝒊𝒈 calculated the variables. Had the dark aura of his tower corrupted her mind, forcing her to accelerate her growth? In the end, he did not care. As long as his fortress gained more firepower, her methods meant nothing to him. With a dismissive thanks for the meal, the anti-hero set off to fetch her required materials. Cut to the present, black hellfire ignited in his palms. He coldly warned the Imperial Guards that he was on a tight schedule and would be ending their miserable lives quickly. 𝒊𝒈 unleashed a devastating blast, catching Princess Jasmine completely off guard and reducing the surrounding area to ashes. Yet, a wicked smirk crossed his face. He was amused to see her still standing, protected by a blinding, holy aura. Stepping in front of her trembling soldiers, she boldly declared her absolute authority. This was the aura of a true hero, wielding the divine power to obliterate any demonic presence. This divine energy made heroes the natural predators of demon kings. Raising her blade high, she screamed that her destiny was not rotting away in a suffocating palace, but standing victorious on the blood-soaked battlefield. With a single, explosive swing, she unleashed her ultimate technique, the Blood Moon Slash. It was an absolute masterclass of destruction, the highest pinnacle any mortal swordmaster could ever hope to reach. Jasmine knew the harsh reality of her world. Because her kingdom was weak, being sold off as a trophy wife to a foreign king was supposed to be her inescapable fate. But the thought of marrying some decrepit old ruler disgusted her. She chose to defy her twisted destiny, secretly mastering the blade alongside the royal knights. She had bled and broken her bones every single day, just to forge her title from a helpless royal into an unstoppable hero. Now, as her legendary attack surged toward 𝒊𝒈, a spark of desperate hope ignited within her. If she could strike down this absolute evil, the world would finally acknowledge her true strength. Only then could she shatter her father's chains and claim control over her own life. But reality is often cruel. 𝒊𝒈 did not even bother to dodge. With terrifying ease, he shattered her holy aura blade into pieces, instantly crushing her pathetic dreams of victory. Showing no mercy, the overpowered Demon King summoned an apocalyptic shower of dark fire from the heavens. He mockingly hoped she would not die too easily, since she proudly called herself a hero. The crushing weight of despair finally hit her. The truth struck like lightning. She was not fighting a man. She was facing an absolute, unrivaled monster. A sinister smirk crept across his face as he noted how incredibly useful a captive hero princess would be. Cold sweat drenched her body. Her soldiers desperately screamed for her to fall back. But it was already too late. The fiery bombardment annihilated everything in its path. Minutes later, the smoke finally cleared. Onlookers rushed to the blast crater, only to be paralyzed by the suffocating, lingering demonic energy polluting the air. Finding the battered and bloody Imperial Knights, healers scrambled to save their lives. Through blood-stained teeth, the Knights revealed a nightmare. Princess Jasmine had been dragged into the abyss by the Demon King. Panic erupted through the streets. A Demon King had casually walked into their territory. It did not take long to put the pieces together. The culprit was none other than 𝒊𝒈. Meanwhile, deep within the nightmarish underground dungeon of 𝒊𝒈's tower, Nan stared at the unconscious girl in the cell, asking if this was the magical item she requested. The anti-hero scoffed. He introduced the prisoner as 𝒊𝒂𝒕🔌 Jasmine, the 9th princess of the Great Empire. He casually ordered Nan to heal the battered royal, stating that the princess would be permanently residing on the 4th floor from now on. Completely bewildered, Nan demanded to know why he was hoarding princesses like collectibles. His response was chillingly casual. He just happened to see her on his walk and grabbed her. Besides, his system required such wicked deeds to harvest demonic energy points. Nan tilted her head, innocently asking what those points meant. 𝒊𝒈 almost blurted out the truth of his game-like system, barely stopping himself when he remembered she was technically his hostage. He quickly changed the subject, declaring he was heading out to secure the spirit powder she needed. As he walked away, a dangerous thought crossed his mind. Was he getting too comfortable with this mortal? Letting his guard down was a fatal mistake for a villain. Soon after, the devastating news of the 9th princess being abducted sent massive shockwaves across the entire continent. Over at the Hero Association headquarters, tension was suffocating. They interrogated Hill Len, forcing him to swear on his honor that he had not found 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏's tower during his expedition. Putting on a flawless act, the corrupted hero bowed his head, apologizing for his failure and swearing to take full responsibility. Surprisingly, the council let him off the hook. They reasoned that punishing a high-ranking hero for a failed scouting mission would only destroy morale for future crusades. The conversation immediately shifted to the kidnapped royal. They informed Hill that the princess's home country was desperately demanding a full-scale hero expedition to rescue her. Playing his role as the Demon King's loyal puppet perfectly, Hill expressed deep sorrow for the princess's tragic fate. However, he smoothly reminded the council that the Dark Tower remained hidden. Launching a blind, massive invasion would be a suicidal move. Instead, he strongly advised sending only a small, stealthy scout team to map the area first. Only after pinpointing the demonic fortress should they mobilize their main forces. He masterfully manipulated their egos, convincing them that 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏 was hiding out of sheer cowardice. The arrogant heroes swallowed the lie instantly. A demon king hiding in the shadows went against all known logic, so they assumed he was weak. Swayed by Hill's calculated words, the head of the council officially delayed the rescue operation. Stepping out of the meeting room, Hill let out a heavy sigh of relief. A cold sweat ran down his back as he wondered if manipulating the highest authority of heroes was exactly what his demonic master had planned. Regardless, he had successfully bought 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏 the crucial time he needed. Now, the rest of this dark game was entirely in the Demon King's hands. Back in the shadows, the system relayed Hill's successful sabotage directly to 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏. A sinister smile curved on the villain's lips. Turning that arrogant hero into his loyal dog had just saved him from a massive headache. Checking his newly updated stat window, he realized these extra days were the perfect buffer. Even better, snatching the hero princess had massively skyrocketed his demonic energy points. His mind formulated a wicked strategy. If he used the mind-corrupting Ahriman orb on her, he could brainwash a powerful hero into his personal vanguard. Meanwhile, Logger was heavily upgrading the first floor with lethal traps. Combine that with Kuru expanding their dark domain, and Nan securing a devastating high-tier spirit contract. The tower's absolute defense mechanism would be flawless. He wanted to build a fortress so horrifying that even the bravest heroes would tremble in fear and refuse to march. Once his unbreakable stronghold was ready, his true, blood-soaked revenge against the world would finally begin. To make this nightmare a reality, he needed to step right into the lion's den. He infiltrated the magic city of Amor, a dangerous hub crawling with elite mages and wandering heroes, all to secure the rare spirit powder. Standing at the city limits, even the overpowered anti-hero knew he had to tread carefully, as the survival difficulty here was off the charts. Deep within the magical capital, 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏 slipped into the lawless slums of 𝒆THInd Paradise. Inside a shady, dimly lit shop, the merchant was already gossiping about the latest newspaper headlines. The whole world was panicking over the 9th princess getting kidnapped right after the grand expedition ended. Even rumors of the dwarven hero, Logger, being a wanted fugitive, had reached the greedy merchant's ears. Suddenly, the rusted door was kicked open. 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏 stepped into the shadows, demanding the rare powder. The shopkeeper flashed a sly, missing-tooth grin, bragging that he had the goods. But 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏 looked around with absolute disgust. He only chose this filthy black market dump because the Great Kingdom was a magnet for the continent's strongest magic users. Walking into a high-end store risked crossing paths with an elite hero, someone whose sheer magical prowess might just pierce through his flawless demonic disguise. For that exact reason, the former Demon King sought out a rundown shop lingering on the outskirts of town. Inside, the sleazy merchant praised 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏's supposed good fortune, demanding 1 gold coin for a single vial of powder. The greedy man dangled the item before him, but our anti-hero simply told him to shut his mouth, coldly stating that the price was an absolute rip-off. Besides, the Ken powder 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏 remembered from his past life was always green. This suspicious purple substance screamed, "Scam." Ignoring the glaring red flags, the merchant smoothly assured him that this purple variant was a highly classified new recipe, not yet available to the general public. The silver-tongued swindler tried to bait him into the purchase, swearing on his life that this was a once-in-a-lifetime treasure. In reality, he was just trying to bleed 𝒆𝒂𝒐𝒏 dry. The rat figured that any customer avoiding the prestigious capital markets must have some dark secret to hide. Our overpowered main character saw right through the pathetic extortion attempt, casually pondering whether he should just snap the merchant's neck. But before his killing intent could spike, the wooden door blasted open. Standing in the frame was none other than the mad Princess Louise, flanked by the dwarven guard captain. Beria's eyes narrowed as he instantly recognized their auras. He knew exactly who they were, and more importantly, that they were hunting down Logger. As the royal duo interrogated the sweating shopkeeper about the dwarven hero, Beria remained perfectly still. He prayed to the dark gods that Louise would not see through his disguise, relying heavily on the magical artifact he had used during their previous clash. The foolish merchant then scoffed, claiming he could not offer any information unless they purchased some of his wares. This instantly triggered the mad princess. In a flash of steel, her blade was at his throat, viciously warning the peasant to know his place before trying to extort royalty. Miraculously, the stubborn merchant refused to back down. He smugly reminded her that murder was strictly forbidden within capital territory, and if she wanted the right to threaten him, she should at least buy a souvenir first. Even with the grim reaper hovering over his shoulder, the man did not flinch. He boldly declared that as long as they spent some coin, he would willingly accept whatever punishment she dished out. Caught off guard by his sheer audacity, Louise burst into maniacal laughter, calling him a deeply fascinating lunatic. She demanded to see his absolute best stock, and the con artist shamelessly presented the exact same purple vial he had just tried to force onto Beria. Only this time, he rebranded it as the legendary eye powder, spinning a massive lie about how it would greatly boost the power of dwarven masters. Watching from the shadows, Beria realized this guy was a legendary class scammer. He watched in disbelief as the merchant hiked the price to 3 gold coins. Louise, completely oblivious to the concept of haggling, tossed the money over, leaving the greedy shopkeeper doing a victory dance in his head. Having paid the ridiculous toll, she coldly demanded Logger's location, but the shameless man simply shrugged, swearing he had never heard that name in his entire life. To cover his tracks, he fed her a completely fabricated lead, pointing her toward a famous blacksmith district where someone might magically know the target. With a disgusted scoff at the merchant's disgraceful behavior, the royal knights finally stormed out. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, Beria gave a slow clap for the shopkeeper's reckless bravery. Wiping sweat from his brow, the scammer bragged that he had to take the gamble, since the crazy girl was clearly dripping in noble wealth. Riding high on his recent victory, the cunning merchant then turned his sights back to Beria. He outrageously demanded 10 gold coins in exchange for a top-tier secret. But the former demon lord was already 3 steps ahead. Amused by the sheer grit of this mortal, Beria ordered the man to head straight to the Golden Moon Merchant Guild. He instructed him to use a secret password, sent by the mountain, guaranteeing they would hire him on the spot. Confused, the shopkeeper scoffed at the offer, claiming that guild was already completely bankrupt and worthless. It was then that Beria dropped the ultimate bombshell. He calmly revealed that the girl the merchant had just scammed was none other than Louise, the dangerously insane dwarven princess. The color drained from the man's face, and the fragile glass vial slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering across the floor. Shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, the terrified man stuttered out a desperate plea, asking what Beria wanted from him. With a devilish smirk, Beria repeated his guild offer, promising a steady salary of 1 gold coin per month. If he refused, he would simply whistle for Louise to return. The merchant fell to his knees in tears, begging for mercy before his paranoia kicked back in, accusing Beria of spinning a massive lie. To his tiny mortal brain, there was absolutely no way royal blood would wander into these filthy slums. Calling what he thought was a bluff, the doomed man foolishly dared Beggar to bring the girl back. Never one to reject a challenge, 𝒊𝒒 casually stepped outside. Mere seconds later, the shop door exploded off its hinges. Louise stormed back inside with an aura of pure murderous rage, and the merchant instantly knew his life was over. A brutal off-screen beatdown echoed through the streets. Shortly after, Beggar strolled out of the wreckage, clutching the genuine senin powder he had wanted all along. Unsurprisingly, the real stuff was the exact shade of emerald green he remembered. He then locked eyes with the huffing princess. Surprised to see her mysterious informant again, she practically beamed as she thanked him for helping retrieve her stolen gold. Feigning innocent curiosity, our anti-hero casually asked what she had done to the poor shopkeeper. Louise clicked her tongue, bitterly complaining that the capital's strict laws had saved his pathetic life. Otherwise, she would have ripped his beating heart straight from his chest. Beggar internally chuckled at her consistent psychotic energy, but the mention of a heart suddenly triggered a massive revelation. Hiding his shock, he swiftly pivoted the conversation, asking if she was still desperately tracking down the hero known as Logger. Seeing her killing intent spike at the name, he masterfully played his trap card. He pulled out Logger's signature necklace, casually weaving a lie about stumbling across the target 2 months prior deep within a tropical death forest. According to his fabricated backstory, 𝒏𝒈 had shared his meager rations with the starving dwarf, receiving the rare trinket as a token of absolute gratitude. Hearing this, the princess was torn between boiling frustration and overwhelming joy at finally securing a solid clue. Grasping the pendant, Louise passionately declared that she was deeply in his debt once again. She swore she wanted nothing more than to drag 𝒏𝒈 to the royal palace for a legendary drinking banquet. But alas, the hunt for Logger took absolute priority before her prey could vanish into the shadows. As a token of her royal favor, she shoved her golden crest into his hands, an artifact capable of claiming the highest-tier equipment in the entire kingdom. 𝒏𝒈 coolly pocketed the ultimate pass, watching the chaotic princess charge off with her exhausted knights. Through his masterful manipulation, he had just learned her master plan. She was heading straight to the Dwarven King to mobilize an entire army just to capture Logger. Once the dust settled, 𝒏𝒈's mind flashed back to her morbid comment about ripping out a heart. A cold sweat dripped down his neck. In his obsession to avoid the pathetic death of a cliché demon king, he had almost forgotten a world-shattering event. The timelines were aligning. Right around this exact moment in his previous life, the bastard Drexen had stumbled upon the legendary heart of a divine beast. Consuming it had granted his enemy absolute overwhelming power. And now, that divine heart was the only treasure 𝒏𝒈 truly desired. He knew his current vessel was still heavily nerfed by dimensional interference. If he were forced to clash with a fully armored Louise right now, the odds of victory were terrifyingly slim. The path was clear. To brutally crush the so-called heroes and dominate this twisted new timeline, 𝒏𝒈 had only one option left. It was time to shatter his limits and awaken his true godlike power. The real hunt begins now.